make any sense of what he's coming out with. He could have made that speech.
I don't think he believes in anything that he says or even thinks.
I mean, that was basically, and forgive me for saying this, an arse covering exercise. That's all it was. To say that, listen, I wasn't covering anything up. You know, I was only telling you what I could tell you, and I was saving you and saving the court case from anything else. Absolutely ridiculous.
The whole thing,
ridiculous.
On a happier note, Donald Trump, fantastic. Home of Common Sense, he's nicked my line. This is, of course, the Home of Common Sense. Julia Hartley-Brewer is next. I'll see you tomorrow at 6.
Common Sense, great job, great job.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. We are at 3 minutes past 10 o'clock. And whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, we are very, very delighted to have your company. We have, as always, goodness me, a lot to talk about, as if yesterday wasn't a busy enough news day with Trump inauguration, the Axel Rudakabana guilty plea, and of course the aftermath of that hostage release in Israel. Wow, we have another day today of it. And can get straight to it with my guest this morning, who is, of course, Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Topics we're going to cover. We've got to get to all of them because they are all so important. Keir Starmer addressing the nation about an hour and a half earlier this morning. He admitted that he did know that Axel Rudakabana had terror links in the wake of the Southport attack. He knew he'd been referred to Prevent 3 times, which is an anti-terrorism body. The PM also said the tragedy of the Southport killings must be a line in the sand for Britain. And by the way, we're all very right to be angry about what happened. Although it's interesting, we're right to be angry now, But only last summer we were all far right for being angry. So it's very difficult to keep up with what we are or are not allowed to feel as divided by this Prime Minister. We know after Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, announced that public inquiry last night into the murder of the 3 girls by Rudy Cabana, that we are going to see this inquiry. We've got a bit more detail about it from the Prime Minister today. We'll talk about that. And I do want to hear from you, because he's admitted, yes, he did know about the terror links at the time, basically, when he was telling everyone else we were far right. That's what he was doing. Anyone who was angry, not just people throwing bricks, people writing stuff online, people questioning whether there was a conspiracy, was a cover-up. He says there was no cover-up. But he knew when he told people they were far right, when people were being convicted for some of the things they'd written online about this case, that there was a terrorism link. He admitted, yes, this was an act of terrorism. I want to know what your reaction is to that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word TALK to 87222. You can also message us on X at Talk TV. Although, be careful what you write, because you never know, the police might turn up at your door. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs 1 standard network rate message. Also, obviously, going to be talking a lot about Donald Trump. There's executive orders, pardons for the January 6 rioters, and much more besides. But Tom Slater, let's come straight to you on this Southport case. As always, the Prime Minister talked, a lot of platitudes, a lot of hand-wringing. He did say more than he normally says in any of these completely planned statements. But fundamentally, he admitted that, he did know. He did know about these terror links.
No, and that was something which is really not going to reassure those members of the public who felt that something was being withheld from them. We've known, as in terms of what has actually been reported, that these terror offences, these terror charges had been lodged back in October, many months after the attacks themselves. And Starmer's explanation for all of this is essentially contempt of court. I did not want to do anything that would collapse the trial, therefore leaking out any information on that front could potentially do that. Does that really make sense given the fact that we knew about these charges many months ago? Is the fact that the Al-Qaeda terror manual and the writing which was found in Axel Rudy Cabana's room, is this something which could have somehow prejudiced a trial that still was yet to take place because we'd already found out about it?
But also we know that the writing and the terror manual were found in his home. It was definitely known to be writing in the early days of August. It was they'd found manual. So at the horrific stabbing. And by the way, everyone keeps talking about the murder of 3 girls. The attempted murder of about 20 girls. I mean, there are still 8 girls who are recovering from their stabbing wounds, and some more of the detail has emerged. I mean, it's an absolutely horrific, life-changing event for these children, and the families. And not just those who lost their children. I mean, the whole thing is just beyond awful what happened, and the 2 adults stabbed as well. But they knew within days that there was writing, there was this terror manual. The act of having downloaded that manual, that act is a terror act. For them to say there is no terror act, this is not terrorism. For them to actually then, not to even announce those charges or make those charges until I think it was October, months after. I mean, clearly people have reason to think there's a cover-up.
Well, they certainly have reason to think that they're being held in contempt, definitely. The thing about our contempt of court laws is the fact that they are based on this assumption that jurors and that the public more broadly cannot be trusted with this amount of information. That they will form a very fixed view which could influence a particular trial, or that the kind of general atmosphere of speculation and discussion could potentially collapse an entire trial. These restrictions naturally treat the public with contempt, and that's something that should be looked at. Then there's the other question of, even above and beyond what was required by law, were the government being particularly cagey about these details because there was this fear of some kind of backlash, of continuing to inflame tensions? And it's hard to think that wasn't the case, given the fact that this information was known very early on, that we also knew about these charges many months ago. Surely being slightly more open with the public, to the extent that the law allows, would have been a much better strategy.
And the law does allow more information. Again, it's Nigel Farage who was very much criticised for some of the comments he made. Like, is there a cover-up? He knew he'd been given information. This killer had been referred to prevent programme. Now, I'm very much in favour of us keeping information in the public eye. that could prejudice Jar being out of the public eye. I don't like the American system where anyone could go on telly going, he's a killer, he's a killer. No, I'm sorry. I want people to be innocent until proven guilty, even when the evidence is overwhelming, as it was at that time. There wasn't a question of, oh, was it this crazed madman with a knife, or was it a different crazed madman with a knife who was chased out? We knew, I mean, they knew it was him. There wasn't a question of, oh, you know, has he been picked out in a lineup? That wasn't what the case was going to rest on. However, they did put out information that they thought would help the authorities, which was, hey, he's born in Cardiff. He's not a legal immigrant, but he wasn't. He was born in Cardiff. And they knew that fact was true, but they also knew it was, I mean, I think Matt Goodwin said it was disingenuous. They knew what people interpreted. And at that point, people realised afterwards, because people who've been on the scene were going, well, I saw the guy. I know what he looked like. I don't think that is a fair representation of what they try to put out. And we all know what they were trying to do there. I mean, in terms of the Prime Minister saying, you know, there's a lot of platitudes, like every parent in Britain will have had the same thought. It could have been anywhere. It could have been our children. Like, yeah, absolutely. But he said, we must make sure that there's a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children. In pursuit of that, we must, of course, ask and answer difficult questions, he says. Questions that should be far-reaching, unburdened by cultural and institutional sensitivities and driven only by the pursuit of justice. This is what we owe the families. I will not let any institution of the state deflect from the failures that had happened. Failure, which in this case, frankly, leaps off the page. He was referred to a PREVENT programme, 3 separate occasions. On each of these occasions, a judgment was made. He did not meet the threshold, etc., etc. None of this. It's now time for questions. The first of those is whether this was a terrorist attack. The blunt truth here is that this case is a sign. Britain now faces a new threat. Terrorism has changed. Later on, he was asked by a reporter, you know, do you think this was terrorism? He said, yeah, it was a case of terrorism. But when he says the time has come to ask and answer difficult questions, and we mustn't let, you know, any institution, you know, deflect. That's exactly, and unburdened by culture, of course, that's exactly what Labour has been doing all this time. And the Tories quite a lot as well, but particularly Labour. It's what they've been doing, since the grooming gang story. It's what they've been doing for 20, 30 years. It's what they've been doing on every time a question is raised about people. And again, even the argument, oh, well, you know, this guy wasn't an immigrant. Oh, well, in that case, he was the child of immigrants. He was the child of immigrants from a country that had been war-torn in Rwanda. There's evidence that his father had been involved in that war. Now, for goodness sake, there is ample statistical evidence that the children of immigrants, particularly from war-torn countries where there has been violence, are more prone to violence. There's evidence of this. And yet anyone who raises that is racist, xenophobic and far right. When Keir Starmer says this is all going to change now, there are going to be open questions, open answers, and we're going to talk about it openly and not deflect, do you believe for a minute that he means it?
No, I think a lot of this exercise in calling for a public inquiry, whilst will be met gladly by some people in terms of getting to the bottom of what happened, there clearly has been a broader state failure in terms of not picking up these PREVENT referrals and doing something about them. There's also a way in which you can kind of generalise the problem, deflect attention away from the way in which the government themselves handled it, and the details that we're eking out about this case is an important case in point. The reason that they seemingly, the police that is, revealed that Axel Ruda-Cabana was born in Wales, that he was a British citizen, was obviously in response to all of the genuinely far-right, hard-right misinformation that's
completely
flying
untrue stuff, yeah,
about him being a Muslim asylum seeker and so on. And yet you did think to yourself, this is proof of the issue that was being pointed out in the first place, that because there was this vacuum of information, because there was this caginess about talking about what had actually taken place here, partly informed, obviously, by the perpetrator's age, but also partly informed by contempt of court and so on, but generally speaking, it was clearly much more cagey than it had been. You created the environment in which they did lose control of the narrative, in which people were able to wildly speculate, in which you did get a situation where, again, misinformation merchants and people who genuinely did want to stir up trouble and direct anger towards mosques and so on, and leading to the horrendous violence that we saw, were able to operate. Yeah. So you think the lesson of that whole period was maybe we need to be more open with the public, maybe the way in which that we could previously control information, the flow of information, doesn't really work in the social media age. We need to adapt. They didn't listen to any of that, and they allowed the genuine bad actors online
to take over
as consequence.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my colleague Isabel Oakeshott, you know, we're going to talk to Richard Tice in a couple of moments. He, Nigel, me, you know, I wasn't away on holiday for a week of this. I apparently was responsible for people rioting in the streets when I was away on holiday, lying on a sunbed. I came up from a snorkel and discovered I was responsible for this. It was like, that was news to me. Again, I've never endorsed violence. I've always said, you know, good God, I mean, every single time I'm absolutely staunch on this. You don't break the law, you know, you battle to change the law, whether it's on COVID or anything else. I found it absolutely extraordinary. Let's play a little clip, though, of Keir Starmer when he was asked about... no, apologies, we haven't got that clip ready. I do apologise. We will get to some clips a little bit later in the show, I promise you. As much as you want to hear Keir Starmer clips. I mean, you know, I mean, really, you know, we do have a clip. He's talking about withholding information about the responsibility for the disorder. And here's what he had to say about that.
Responsibility for the disorder and the violence lies with those that perpetrated it. And we need to be really clear about that. But let me address the facts as you put them to me. There has been a failure here, and I don't intend to let any institution of the state deflect from their failures, and I acknowledge that readily here. Yes, I knew the details as they were emerging. That is the usual practice in a case such as this. But you know and I know that it would not have been right to disclose those details. The only losers, if the details had been disclosed, would be the victims and the families, because it ran the risk the trial would collapse.
That was actually in response to a question from a journalist about, about withholding information. Do you think that flies, Tom?
I don't think it does, because, again, we saw more information be released just on a kind of slower speed, on a slower track. We did find out about his identity even before he turned 18, which was the original pretext for...
So the rules are the rules, except when they change the rules.
No, exactly. So it's quite clearly that there was a strategy, and could have been with the best intentions, but it clearly completely blew up in their faces and ended up turning a horrendous situation even worse by allowing that information vacuum to sit there.
And then, yes, absolutely, there were far-right perpetrators. Yes, there were people who were violent, who absolutely should be behind bars. I've got no issue with that whatsoever. But then labelling pretty much anyone who was concerned about this as far-right and a conspiracy theorist and stirring up community tensions and the like, whilst by an outrageous display of two-tier policing and two-tier justice being meted out, followed, by the way, a load of rapists and burglars and repeat offenders being let out of prison so we could keep someone who wrote a Facebook post 3 months earlier behind bars. I think most people will find just utterly revolting and, frankly, be very unconvinced by what Keir Starmer had to say. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do get in touch, 0344 499 1000. We're going to go to a quick break. Then we're going to be hearing from the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. And then we will be talking about Donald Trump. He's been quite busy in the last 24 hours. That's up next. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good morning to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. It's 10:20. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater, editor at Spiked Online, is with us. We've been discussing the Southport inquiry that's been announced, and also Keir Starmer's statement this morning to the nation just under 2 hours ago. Let's talk about it with Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, who joins us now. Richard, very good morning to you. It's good to know, is it not, that according to the Prime Minister, we are right to be angry about what happened in the Southport attack, in which 3 girls were stabbed to death, 8 others were brutally stabbed, children and another 2 adults as well. But last summer, I believe we were all far right, were we not? Difficult to keep up, isn't it?
Well, we are very angry, that is for sure. But we're also angry with the Prime Minister, who today basically is trying to distract from the reality. He has admitted this morning that he, and therefore presumably the Home Secretary, they knew within very short order, a matter of hours, about the details of Rudy Cabana. They will have known about his previous involvement with Prevent, with the courts and various others. And they made a deliberate judgment in conjunction with the police to withhold that information from the British people and to declare it a non-terror incident. And I've just been doing a bit of research. And let me just run down a list where lone terror attacks have immediately been declared a terror incident and information has been given about the perpetrator. 2016, the murder of Joe Cox by Thomas Mayer. 2017, the murder of Keith Palmer at Westminster by Khalid Massoud. August 18, car attack outside Westminster. Another lone attack immediately declared a terror incident. December 18, Mahdi Mohammed stabbing 3 people in Manchester Station, immediately declared a terror incident by the police, information given. All of those instances actually were lone attackers, and before they were charged, it was declared a terror incident. What happened here is the authorities and the government made a decision not to tell the British people. That's why Nigel Farage, our leader, said he thought there were questions to be answered and were we being told the truth. And the simple answer is that I think the government and many Labour MPs owe Nigel a serious apology for smearing and labelling him.
Well, and indeed, and everyone else as well. And again, you and I and Nigel Farage and many, many others who commented, many of our audience, all are equally horrified and condemned the violence on our streets. There's no justification for people, surrounding a mosque or trying to set fire to an asylum seekers hotel or pelting police with bricks. And we all condemned it at the time. No one encouraged that. That was far right was encouraging that. Some violent thugs. Most of the people who were convicted of those things, by the way, had long criminal records already. But people who were simply saying things online, people who were expressing concern, asking questions, were also condemned as being far right. And this is the thing, isn't it? They're now saying they're going to sort of redefine what terror is. They're going to look obviously about how these things are all available on the internet. There's always, whatever the case, there's always an urgency for some censorship on the web. But do you think there's anything that the Prime Minister said today that suggests that any action that is going to make a difference, will prevent loss of life again, is going to be taken?
This is a classic throw a dead cat to distract everybody onto the table. You don't need to change any terrorism laws. This could have been declared an act of terrorism within 24 hours based on the existing legislation that I have read very, very carefully. It's pretty basic stuff that if you've got an Al-Qaeda training manual on your computer, you have got a political motivation. And
that in itself is a terror offence. It is an offence to have that.
That is the criteria to give you the motive, but if you then carry out a violent attack, it is a terrorist attack under the Terrorism Act 2000. So I'm sorry, they are deliberately misleading us to cover up the fact that they chose not to tell us the truth at the time, and they chose to say it was a non-terror incident. I believe through political correctness and because they wanted to cover up the failure of multiple state agencies over many years over this complete monster. And look, fine, have your public inquiry. Funny, isn't it? He's happy to announce a public inquiry when clearly other people apart from Labour councillors are clearly to blame. But if it's Labour councillors to blame, no, we're not having a statutory public inquiry. Funny that. I tell you what, this stinks to high heaven.
Exactly. No grooming gang inquiry, but we'll have an inquiry into this. I want to play you a very short clip of what Keir Starmer had to say, talking about the significance of this tragedy in terms of going forward. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what he has to say here.
The tragedy of the Southport killings must be a line in the sand for Britain. We must make sure the names of those 3 young girls are not associated with the vile perpetrator, but instead with a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children. In pursuit of that, we must, of course, ask and answer difficult questions. Questions that should be far-reaching, unburdened by cultural or institutional sensitivities, and driven only by the pursuit of justice. That is what we owe the families.
I mean, incredibly fine, strong words there, Richard Tice. Do you believe a single one of them?
Anybody can say fine words, but I think the British people are sick of all the waffle that constantly comes out of the establishment in these instances. We were told after the London Bridge attacks 5 or 6 years ago that Prevent was failing and needed to be reformed. Well, surprise, surprise, nothing happened. All this reinforces, I think, is that huge chunks of the way the state works or fails to work needs fundamental root and branch reform, but also people need to be held to account. Who made these judgments at Prevent, at the courts, at the police, at social care workers? You know, frankly, people need to be held to account, held responsible, and in many cases, fired. It's just not acceptable to continue with these multiple failings time after time after time.
And this is part of the issue, isn't it? Again and again, I can think of not a single example where we've had a terror attack in this country, whether you call it a terror attack or not at the time, but a single case where it has not been revealed later on in the court or immediately aftermath that the perpetrator has been known to the authorities, often for concern about their links with terrorism, or, you know, multiple engagement with the police or Prevent or elsewhere. And again, what we now know about the 18-year-old Axel Rudolph, that apparently completely normal little lad till the age of 12, and then at some point in year 9, he basically becomes a different child entirely. Apparently he's blaming bullying at the time, but, you know, attacking classmates, taking a knife into school, getting expelled, barely leaves his bedroom. And again, we were shown this picture of this lovely little innocent-looking choir boy that apparently, Rich Tess, although we do not see the mugshot of a suspect until after the trial, we know that is the case. Not a single photo existed of this young man between the ages of 12 and the age of 18, which seems bizarre. But this is the thing. He was again and again, again and again there was concern. His father, only a week before the Southport attack, begged his taxi driver not to take his son to his old school because he feared there would be violence. And it turns out he had a knife then. Why didn't his parents do something? Why didn't the authorities do something? What does someone have to do repeatedly for the authorities to actually basically take them off the streets and ensure they are not a threat?
Well, it's a very good question, but the British people are not stupid. And this choir boy picture, taken many years before, that was a deliberate deception in order to mislead the British people. Nothing less than that. Of course, there would have been a more recent photo. And frankly, if there wasn't, they could have taken one that day and put it out there. I think we're just sick and tired of all of this. It's totally unacceptable. I use the word political correctness, fears over being accused of a bigot or racism. If you arrest someone and charge someone or are sort of challenging with someone from an ethnic minority. And of course, that's what led to the child rape gangs and multiple other horrors across the UK over the last decade and a half. And it's just, the authorities they've got to have the courage. And the Prime Minister did refer to we've got to override cultural sensitivities. Well, we should have done that a long time ago. And sadly, people have died because of that cowardice, that gutless leadership. at every of those agencies and institutions.
And indeed, those of us who have, those politicians or journalists like myself and yourself, for the last 10, 20 years saying we need to override those cultural sensitivities, have been derided as far right and racist and bigot every single time. Now, though, the Prime Minister has said it, so it's OK. Good to know, Keir Starmer. Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Come back to you, Tom Slater. I mean, again, the photographs, that was kind of one of the giveaways. Was genuinely not a single photograph of Rudiger Barnett for 5 years, apparently.
That was a really strange one. There's not even a scrap of CCTV that exists. It's not to say that I think the government were trying to make people feel sorry for the alleged perpetrator.
What was the purpose of putting out a photo of an angelic 12-year-old?
I have absolutely no idea. And I think a lot of people will ask those questions. Yes, this is an individual that from the reporting seems to have been pretty much alone and very marginal for many of the past few years. During the time he's being referred to Prevent multiple times, we should point out. But the fact that no other images existed is another one of many questions people will be asking as they look at this case.
Yeah, and again, it seems minor, but again, it's all part of that sort of what was the message, what was the deliberate attempt. I mean, the Prime Minister says there is no cover-up, we're going to have this full inquiry. I don't know. I mean, I've never been a conspiracy theorist at all. I've been like poo-pooing a lot of this stuff. There is clearly there are questions to be answered. Do you trust any of the people who, and he's got a somewhat new head of Prevent into place, do you think any of these people are going to be capable of honestly answering these questions and getting to the bottom of it when so many of them have basically been signed up to the same line as Keir Starmer has for the last 20, 30 years, which is that anyone who raises any issues is a racist?
Well, what's so strange about this particular case is that unlike other terrorist attacks that we've had previously, and obviously I get that in this case this individual has been charged with a terror offence. There is a debate over whether or not the attack itself was
it motivated by Al-Qaeda, or was it motivated by just murderers?
Because he was in possession of this terror manual, but he also seemed to have all kinds of material on the war in Grozny, on Ukraine, school shootings. This seems to have just been an individual who was really preoccupied.
He seems sort of more similar to the sort of those mass school killers that we see, rather than someone motivated by Al-Qaeda in particular. But the kids were still terrorised again and again. Should we get hung up on these sort of words? I would ask as well. I really appreciate that. Lots more to come. I want to take a quick call. I'm going to get to more calls in this next half hour. I promise you. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let's go to Simon. He's in Reading. Simon, what's your reaction to what the Prime Minister's had to say?
OK, so there was a couple of points really. First point is that I sat and watched through all that as
well done.
Like everyone else. He could have. He wasn't acting as a leader of the country. What he was acting as a lawyer in a courtroom, and he was trying to prioritise that over communicating with the country.
He's always a lawyer first, isn't he?
Yes. If he had shown some leadership and said, "Look, here's the situation. I think it's a lone person. There is a link to ideology that we're following up. Trust us, I'll come back to you as soon as I know more information. Yeah. At the moment, keep calm, etc., etc." Had he had done that, he would have shut down conspiracy. Yeah. He would have shut down foreign actors trying to stoke unrest. Yep. He would have shut down rioting. He would certainly have shut down people who thought twice about doing a tweet and then stopping it and then getting prosecuted. But the fact that he didn't, the knock-on effect was that all this stuff happened. Yeah. And it's just that 14 years, you would have thought he'd had some leadership training, or perhaps he had sat down one day and said to himself, well, actually, I'm leader of the country now.
Yeah, I'm not just a lawyer. And again, and as other senior legal figures have said, actually they could have given more information. They chose some of the information to give out. They could have given other information if they'd chosen. Simon, I so appreciate a call. Very good points. Thank you very much indeed. If you want to have your say, give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We will take the calls, as I say, in the next 50 minutes or so. First up, we're going to take a break. Then we're going to be hearing from a former advisor to Donald Trump about, what he has been doing in the last 24 hours. Wow, he's been busy. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, and Tom Slater is still with me from Spiked Online. Delighted to be joined right now by Jan Halper-Hayes, live from the States, former advisor to Donald Trump, now a political psychologist. A very, very good morning to you, Jan.
Good morning, Julia. It's been some time.
It has been. Well, I believe there used to be this guy called Donald Trump who was president of the United States. I believe he may be back again. And wow, did he not come back with a flourish yesterday? Like, we've had an awful lot going on here in the UK to talk about, but obviously all attention was on Donald Trump during the inauguration. My God, it went on a long time yesterday, as these things do. So many balls, so many speeches, so many rallies. But the really important stuff was those executive orders that he signed in his very first few hours. Some of them signed indeed on stage at one of the rallies. I just want to play you a very short clip, Jan, before I get to questions, of what he had to say about the executive orders he was signing yesterday.
Today I will sign a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. It's all about common sense.
I mean, he's stolen our tagline. It is all about common sense. I have to say, reading through those executive orders on so many different issues, I was finding it hard to disagree with anything. What did you make of what he had to say?
Well, I completely agree. I anticipated it because he's so good at telling us well ahead of time what that list was going to be. And many of them were well needed.
Yeah, they certainly were. I mean, let's just go through. I mean, one of the crucial issues, of course, was immigration and border control, declaring a national emergency. So you had the right to close the border, and it's been done before by Biden during COVID, and he's done it before as well. Declaring a national emergency when it comes to energy, so energy policy. So drill baby drill, an end to the net zero, mandates on electric vehicles, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. I mean, woohoo to all of that. Withdrawing from the World Health Organization, ending the funding of this organization, all in favour of that. Freezing all government hiring, we definitely need a bit of that here with DOGE, the Department of Government. What's that? Department of Government. What's efficiency? That's the word. Efficiency, led by Elon Musk. Talking about restoring free speech, an ending of government censorship, building an Iron Dome similar to Israel's Iron Dome, which is pretty much funded and built by America to protect America. Also, I loved what he had to say on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion and transgender rights. Let's have a little watch and listen to what he had to say about that.
I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
I have to say, Jan, praise the Lord for that. It's now official government policy in America that biology is a fact. That's quite encouraging, isn't it?
Well, it is. And one of the things that came out was that if you are overseas right now and want to get back into America, and if your passport does not specify your actual correct biological sex, you have to get your passport reissued and you do not get to come back in.
Wow, that is quite something. Now, again, I would suggest that there should be a period by which time people have to change their passports. But I'm fully in favour of that. And again, also he mentioned race there, the obsession with critical race theory, white supremacy, and the like, and all of that.
And Julia, they haven't realized that it turned it into reverse discrimination against anyone that wasn't part of the DEI. But, there was a time in American politics where we met more in the middle. And of course, I came from California and I was a bit, liberal on some things people might consider. Dianne Feinstein used to be conservative on foreign policy and economics. Who knows what happened to her? But when I came to the UK, and I've been there 24 years, I remember some, when I was on the board of Women in Banking and Finance, some Black women saying to me, I don't need those policies. I want to be recognized for merit.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad that also one of his executive orders is people will be evaluated for merit. That means the skills you bring. What is a better measure of equality than that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so much of it really was common sense. And again, so much of it is stuff that we know has majority support in America. And yet the Democrats have pushed the exact opposite on all of these measures. Do you think the Democrats get it? Do you think they realise? Do you think when they, it was a picture watching Kamala Harris's face, not Joe Biden, he was taking it. Jill Biden and Kamala Harris just looked like they were seething yesterday during his inauguration speech. Do you think on any level they get that they handed this on a plate to Donald Trump with their insane, diversity policies, obsession with trans, obsession with net zero, obsession with, let every illegal migrant enter the country, not a problem, let's give them a house. Do they understand that they gifted the presidency to Donald Trump with that?
No, they still don't. And in fact, the Atlantic magazine, which is incredibly liberal, has come out with an article calling them delusional Democrats. And the new head of the Progressive Caucus with the Democrats actually has doubled down on it. And they doubled down on everything. They do not see that they handed this to us. They do not see the Democrats that they drove from their own party. I mean, there have been people who have voted Democrat all their life, but there is hope that there will be financial stability and improvement. And in fact, they don't have hope that the Democrats are yet going to open their eyes. They still are into identity politics. That is so old.
Yeah.
It's just like any politician that thinks being liked. Donald Trump got rid of that in 2016. You have to like him to get elected.
He really doesn't care, although he does like being loved and adored by his fans. And one of the things that he did, which he knew would get him a lot of love from his diehard fans yesterday, was when he announced, from the stage, that he was going to give a full pardon to some 1,500 of the January the 6th rioters. Only a handful of them are going to face, I think, some 14 particularly violent offenders. They're not getting a full pardon, but they're going to have their sentences commuted. Some of these people committed incredibly violent acts. They're even on camera. There isn't a he said, she said about this. I mean, given that he himself was going to face charges that were dropped once he became president-elect over his role in encouraging, if not leading, but certainly encouraging actions which easily led to the Capitol 6 riots. Do you think this is a good move by him?
Well, it is, but the reason that people aren't yet on board with it is that we need more information to come out. And the fact that the Select Committee destroyed all the evidence is of great concern. The other part is Nancy Pelosi's own daughter was there recording. And so she is on video saying that she actually refused the 10,000 National Guards to protect. And they wanted this to happen, but there's something else.
Jan, nobody wanted that to happen.
Julia, just wait a minute. Let me finish, okay? Because and the reason that I don't want to yet debate that part of it is the more information needs to come out. But what was very strategic about it was that the Democrats had hoped to use the 14th Amendment to prevent him from being elected as president this time, because if you're an insurrectionist.
Yeah.
So there was something very strategic in it also, in it happening.
Yeah.
So look, there are so many stories about who was behind it and what went on, and that will be investigated. So I'm not here.
But we do also know that he happily watched it on TV. Go on, and he happily did not try to stop it, even though his own members of staff have under oath said, and members of his family, that they pleaded with him to speak out and try to stop it.
did you see what Twitter had deleted of him telling people to go home? They deleted it immediately and they canceled his account. So I would love to come back as more of this comes out, because there's really, we could go back.
No, I understand. Look, I understand the two sides. I do think one of the biggest issues when it comes to pardons, the Democrats are just as bad. I really see no role where presidents should be able to pardon people. That judicial system should be totally separate. The politicisation of your political system in that way. I mean, Joe Biden's pardons for everybody. I mean, he's quite happy to pardon his own son, Hunter, as he did previously, for buying a gun while he was drug-addled, for goodness sake. I mean, they're all as bad as each other, I think a lot of us would say. In terms of just in terms of looking ahead, he's getting straight down to business. Very long day. I mean, for a man of 78, the man has got some stamina. I know some 28-year-olds who couldn't last the full day that he did until I think about 1:30 in the morning last night. But it's getting down to business. Is it clear that actually this Trump administration is much more prepared? They are much better staffed, and they are ready to go on day 2 now.
Oh, absolutely. They've already staffed it with 1,000 people that are their pickings. They did not deal with the government's presidential transition. Russ Vought, who will head up the executive office as well as the Office of Management and Budget, gave a wonderful interview explaining how they have figured out how to deal with obstacles and barriers that were put up in 2016 to make government work.
Right.
And the fact is that the DOGE, the Department of
Government Efficiency. I don't know why we can't remember what it's called. It's terrible.
I know. I want to call it government excellence or something, but they haven't gone to that. Is also going to look at regulations. Let me give you an example.
Very, very briefly, if you could.
Sure. In 1984, Congress passed a law that the media no longer had to present both sides of the argument so that they could be biased. Then the Smith-Mundt Act in 2013 through Obama allowed for propaganda. That is also why our media has gone so crazy.
And I'm going to say, American media is definitely crazy. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm sure we'll talk again. Jan Halper-Hayes, former advisor to Donald Trump. So appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. 10:48 is time. Love to hear your thoughts on Trump's executive orders. There was a lot of common sense there. I don't agree with everything, but my God, I would love the equivalent of a new Prime Minister here in the UK. Ain't getting it from Keir Starmer, that's for sure. Give us a call on that, 0344 499 1000. But crucially, we are asking you your reaction to what Keir Starmer had said about what he knew about Axel Rudikama and his terror links. But no, there wasn't a cover-up. Oh, yeah, and we're all right to be angry. We were far right last summer, but we're right to be angry now. Your reaction to that? Give us a call. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. We'll get to your calls in just a moment. I want to bring in editor at Spiked Online, Tom Slater, about Donald Trump. Now, look, I think you've had quite a sort of, I suppose, a sort of change in your views over the last 8 years, same as I have. I mean, I was not a fan of Donald Trump 2016 or 2020. But I would have voted, I made it very clear for the last election in America, I would have voted for Donald Trump given the choices ahead of me. Very excited by a lot of the things that he's announced. Where do you stand on him now?
I feel like I've actually been pretty consistent in my position with Trump, which is that whilst I'm not a supporter of him, I still recognise that the opposition to him was infinitely worse than he was. And also that the reason that people were drawn to him, the reason that those voters, many of whom had voted Democratic for generations, switched to Trump, the reason that at the last election you had all of these black and Hispanic voters who were really treated as the sole property of the Democratic Party, decided to get behind him, that those reasons were good reasons. They had been ignored by the Democratic establishment. They weren't listening to their concerns about immigration, identity, gender, whatever you want to call it, that they'd felt terribly served by an establishment which often just patted them on the head and then ignored their material conditions. All of that, I think, has been borne out. And also that, I think, particularly during Joe Biden's presidency, the kind of new Democratic establishment that we saw that had gone from being out of touch to actually being quite clearly vengeful and anti-democratic, needed to be defeated. And so whilst there's always going to be things around the edges, the January 6th circus, Trump's tendency towards authoritarianism, Trump's...
we've seen plenty of that from the Democrats too.
And it was, I think many voters came to the conclusion, understandably so, that his kind of pantomime tendencies in these respects paled into comparison to the much more concerted and much more powerful forms of that kind of authoritarianism.
That's my thing for me. The pendulum just swung so madly in the Democrat direction. And if it has to go too far the other way, so be it, to get some semblance of sanity back. And I think that's what's going to have to happen here as well. I really, really do. Let's go to your calls now, though. You can call about Trump as well, but I certainly want to hear your thoughts on Southport, particularly what Keir Starmer had to say this morning about what he knew and what he didn't know as ahead of, around the time he was condemning people, not just for riots, but for just, asking questions about the Southport attacker. Let's go to Matthew. He's on the line in Bolton. It's called 0344 499 1000. Good morning to you, Matthew.
Good morning, Julia. It's good that you're covering this story.
What do you want to say?
There's a lot to unpack from his waffle. Certainly is. Mike's use of the word plank comes to mind.
Yep.
This info that supposedly was withheld, has anyone cared to ask what it was? Any of the media who were there, did they say, well, what was that info? Why can they not now tell us what that info was?
Well, the information about Prevent and about, again, they definitely knew about the ricin and the Al-Qaeda manual. They knew about that by early August, 100%, and they kept that back.
Right, OK. Well, it's not been clear from what I've heard. I think the Chief Constable, Serena Kennedy, has questions to answer.
Oh, yeah.
That she hasn't been mentioned anywhere about her part in this, in the withholding information. The mugshot is laughable, presenting a child, absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, again, they don't normally give the mugshot of someone who's accused, but the idea there wasn't another photograph of him looking vaguely like he did on the day of the attack is quite absurd.
Yeah, it's totally deceptive.
It was deliberately so, wasn't it? And he's born in Cardiff.
Of course. Yeah. And I think that the subject that's not being covered is his parents. Are his parents here legally?
They are here legally, yes.
They are?
Yes. We've known that for some time. But one of the key things here...
How do we know that, Julia?
OK, you're right. I can't see someone's record, but there's no... there were a number of people who came from Rwanda post the horrible conflict there. But the key... One of the key things here, the question marks for the parents, I would say, was you were so scared of your son getting into a taxi to go to his old school a week before the Southport attack. What? And you didn't literally just go to the police there and then and go, I need you to arrest my son, or go to the doctor. I need you guys to put my son in a mental institution because I think he's a danger.
Absolutely. The line in the sand has been drawn way before this incident anyway, so that's more waffle. You've had Manchester Arena, etc. The other attacks, 7-7. So the line in the sand has been drawn way before, so now he wants to rewrite history. And also the sentencing, they've already asked to use mental health issues as a mitigating factor.
We know that's the defence, although he didn't offer any defence. We know that's what the defence is going to do. Yeah, we're going to see what happens. I doubt very much that he's going to get anything less than a life sentence, but as my guest yesterday pointed out, he can't be on a whole life tariff because he was under 21 at the time of the attack. It was 17. Basically, he's going to be out in 20 years, realistically. Matthew, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Stuart's in Wigan. Stu, what do you want to say? You've got about a minute or so.
Well, I'm absolutely bouncing me. I hate this man. He's a traitor, he's obnoxious, he's a liar, and he's a total and utter scumbag. To keep this away from people, he needs locking up, never mind anything else. He knew all about this. He knew all about this, and he's put them parents through all this, and he's put them through the fact that this one's gone in court first time, when Simon knows actually who his parents were, because he was the one that fought for upstairs. He's a scumbag. He needs to be locked up.
No, look, I don't know why he needs to be locked up and why he's a scumbag. I think he was part of the cover-up. I mean, again, did the police lie to Keir Starmer? No, he absolutely knew about the Prevent links. That information should have been put up, but given to the public. But that doesn't mean he should be locked up.
He should be locked up anyway because he's covered everything up over at grooming gangs as well.
There are,
and he's done it with other people.
Pretty much everybody was trying to do that from start to finish. That's the thing. But you just don't accept anything he had to say this morning.
I don't accept anything he's got to say ever. He's a proven liar.
I mean, I have to say, I don't trust. I say don't trust that he believes a single word that he says ever. That's for sure. Stuart, I
don't even think he's got enough bottles to stick up for his own kids.
Yeah, that is so true. That is so true. Stuart, thank you very much. I appreciate your call. Again, a lot of anger. But again, we were all far right for being angry last year. But don't worry, now we're all quite right to be angry. It's so difficult to keep up with the Starmer rules, isn't it? Love to hear your thoughts. Do get in touch. 0344 499 1000. We're going to be talking a lot more about that statement today about the Southport attack, more of what we know about the Rubicana, and we're going to be talking more about Donald Trump, those executive orders, and hey, common sense breaking out. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense. And whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it's always great to have your company. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to be talking a lot more about Keir Starmer addressing the nation this morning about a couple and a half hours ago. He admitted that he did know Axel Rudikana had terror links in the wake of the Southport attack. He knew he'd been referred to Prevent on 3 occasions, but he said there had been no cover-up. He did say that the tragedy of the Southport killings must be a line in the sand for Britain. We've also had that announcement of the national inquiry into the attacks. Also going to be talking more about Donald Trump. He declared that the golden age of America begins right now in his inauguration speech as the 47th president. He announced sweeping changes to immigration, economic policy, climate policy, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement and the World Health Organization among his executive orders, and a full pardon for 1,500 Capitol rioters on January the 6th. It's already been criticised by the likes of Nancy Pelosi and others who cowered for their own safety as the Capitol was facing that full-scale riot. And today, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor. Remember her? Rachel from Accounts. She's heading to Davos, to the World Economic Forum, where she's pitching a plan for UK investment and growth to the rich and the powerful. I'm sure that's going to go very well. Just as, of course, we see unemployment go up this morning to 4.4%. And by the way, she's the Chancellor of one of the biggest economies in the country, newly elected. Hasn't been asked to do a single keynote speech or even appear on a panel at Davos. That's how much she, and we, by extension, don't matter. No one thinks they have anything to learn from the British economy. What a surprise, eh? I think they probably do think they've got something to learn from what Trump is doing with the American economy. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what he had to say in his executive orders. A lot of common sense, I think, there. I might disagree with some of them, but overall as a package, I'll take it. Thank you, Mr. President. But I also want to hear from you about what our leader, Sir Keir Starmer, had to say this morning in a long statement at Downing Street this morning, where he also took questions from journalists. He admitted that, yes, he did know that Axel Rudikana had terror links in the wake of the Southport attack. He did know he'd been referred to Prevent 3 times over a number of years, but he insisted there had been no cover-up. What's your reaction to that? Love to know your thoughts. So 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK to 87222 and also send us a message on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost 1 standard network rate message. Joining me for the chat, along with you on the phone lines, is Tom Slater, editor at Spiked Online. Tom, just your reaction to what Keir Starmer had to say today.
Well, as ever with Keir Starmer, you feel like if he'd have said some of this many months ago, the situation could have been quite different. He's finally got round to accepting that there is deep public concern about a catastrophic state failure in this particular instance. The number of times over recent years where in the wake of some horrendous massacre, terror attack, what have you, you hear those words known to the authorities. For that to be repeated again on a horrendous killing, the murder of 3 young girls, the attempted murder of many more, the viciousness involved, and the fact that 3 times over the course of about 18 months, Axel Rudikana was referred to the Prevent programme and nothing seemed to have actually been done about this. I accept that this is the profile of this case is a little odd from what we've seen previously. Yes, he was in possession of this Al-Qaeda training manual, this academic study of it, but he seemed to have just been obsessed with violence of all kinds of different flavors and kinds.
We don't. Well, you know, I love the reaction to that. Is like, oh well, eh?
No,
do you know what I mean? Okay.
Exactly. It doesn't fit into category A or category B, and therefore you miss it. The fact that only weeks before he actually managed to commit his depraved attack, he was seemingly going to try and do something very similar at his old school.
He was hoping to do a massacre at his old school where he'd already been expelled, had been carrying a knife, had arrived there with a hockey stick and beat people. One kid got a broken wrist. We knew he was dangerous. They knew he was dangerous. His parents knew he was dangerous. The police knew he was dangerous. Even the officials who had to liaise with him over his education, not that he turned up to the specialist schools he'd been assigned to, would only attend with police. And yet this young man was free to roam the streets as and when he wanted, when his father wasn't there to beg a cab driver not to take him to his old school where he feared he was going to commit violence. I mean, again, I do think the parents have a lot to answer. There's a whole like, oh, well, we lost control of our son. Yeah, but at what point do you say, you know, and we've had cases of people before pleading with authorities, you know, you need to put my son into institutional care. He's a danger. And we saw from that mugshot, which was only released, and it is only, these mugshots are only ever released, are they not, after a verdict of guilt or a guilty plea. The state this boy was, he was 17 and almost 18, he was clearly, you know, he was being a loner. He's basically sitting in his room all day. But here's the thing, hey parents, if your kid is sitting in their room all day looking at genocide and images of beheadings, maybe you want to like flag this with somebody and not just go, oh, well, I hope he doesn't kill anyone. I mean, there's got to be some parental responsibility for what's going on. You've got to be raising those concerns. Let's listen and watch a little clip of Keir Starmer at this press conference today, talking about, you know, the accusation of him withholding responsibility and information and why he didn't give information at the time. This is what Keir Starmer had to say.
Responsibility for the disorder and the violence lies with those that perpetrated it. And we need to be really clear about that. But let me address the facts as you put them to me. There has been a failure here, and I don't intend to let any institution of the state deflect from their failures, and I acknowledge that readily here. Yes, I knew the details as they were emerging. That is the usual practice in a case such as this. But you know and I know that it would not have been right to disclose those details. The only losers, if the details had been disclosed, would be the victims and the families, because it ran the risk the trial would collapse.
But again, when we talk about disclosing details, why was it necessary to disclose that this man was born in Cardiff? I did my journalism training. You had to pass the law course to get the diploma. You know, I worked as a news reporter. I covered court cases for a number of years as a news reporter. I know what you can write at the moment. I put out a tweet only yesterday morning saying, please don't put yourself in contempt of court. Don't derail the trial by putting out anything on social media, you know, begging people, let the jury do their job. This is the rule of law. But why were certain bits of information put out? You know, where someone was born, that's not a piece of information that is normally allowed as a you know name, age, you know, where they're from, what they're charged with. Why were we not allowed to know that ricin had been found? Why were charges not apparently brought until October, after July 29th? We know the ricin was found and confirmed as ricin by the early days of August. You know, August, September, October, 3 months before they charged him with ricin and possession of the Al-Qaeda manual. The Al-Qaeda manual possession in itself was a terror offence. That ownership, downloading that is a terror offence. This was known by the... In no way would that have prejudiced any future trial.
No, and also these details did come out. They just came out slowly, and that suggests that there's
they waited till wet weather, so we weren't out in the streets rioting. That's their thinking. I wonder.
And also, I think there's a big element of a combination of a kind of lawyer's brain. Computer says no, he's under 18, therefore we can't let too much information out there.
And then a judge
just overturned it, and it was obvious there was a public interest in doing so, not least because of all the nonsense and misinformation that's swirling around online. You combine that with a terrifying fear that the more you tell the public, the more likely they are to become volatile, to repeat some of the horrendous scenes we saw in Southport and other northern towns in particular after that attack. I think the opposite is obviously the case. The information vacuum that was created allowed for the speculation, allowed for the bad actors, allowed for all that to be pumped out. And I think, hopefully, that's one lesson that will be learnt by an inquiry or review, is if you take the public seriously, if you allow, up until what the law allows, the information to be out there, to be presented, you can trust them to actually ingest it without turning into some kind of mob. If anything, the mob was whipped up because there was that vacuum.
Because there was indeed. Well, look, let's have a listen and a watch to just another short clip of what Keir Starmer had to say about how this awful tragedy must be a line in the sand. Here's what he had to say.
The tragedy of the Southport killings must be a line in the sand for Britain. We must make sure the names of those 3 young girls are not associated with the vile perpetrator, but instead with a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children. In pursuit of that, we must, of course, ask and answer difficult questions. Questions that should be far-reaching, unburdened by cultural or institutional sensitivities, and driven only by the pursuit of justice. That is what we owe the families.
You always know when Keir Starmer really sort of is on the back foot and really wants to sort of, get a message across, when he talks very, very slowly. It's how Starmer tries to convey seriousness and emotion. Genuinely, it's painful. Even on something such a heart-wrenching story, he still comes across as a robot. And as one of our callers pointed out earlier, he's just always, fundamentally, he's just always a lawyer. It's always a lawyer in the room. You always know that's where he comes from. Do you think any of this is going to fly? Because reading through, going back and watching it and then reading through all the transcripts, make sure you don't miss anything. There's talk about how, people are right to be angry. People are angry and people are right to be angry. Again, I think the people who were right to be angry were called far-right. He didn't just say the people who were throwing bricks and surrounding, in asylum seekers' hotels and talking about burning them. I mean, there were some horrific criminal acts last summer, and those people deserved to be convicted and they deserved to be behind bars or have or other punishment. But there were many, many other people, hundreds, who were punished for just simply writing things, people who were very angry, very upset. Those people now are okay to be angry. Last summer they were far right. I was far right. You were probably far right. Everyone who talked about it was far right. Difficult to keep up, isn't it, with the rules? I
just wonder why, in the wake of that horrific attack back in the summer, he couldn't find the words to do something very, very simple, which was to focus on the horrendous attack itself, not how people online were talking about it, to talk about what needs to be done in order to ensure that, first of all, a fair trial is there, but also to make sure that broader lessons are learned. And, of course, because of the scale of the disorder that we saw, because of the scale of the racism that we saw on our streets and also online, to find a form of words to condemn that as well. This isn't beyond the wit of man. Anyone who was a serious politician should have been able to do that.
Also, hey, why not condemn the gangs of Muslim men armed with baseball bats who were also... No, they weren't arrested, they weren't threatened. People literally having to barricade themselves into a pub. People just sit there, mind their own business, barricading themselves in the pub. A man sort of, beaten senseless outside a pub just for what's going on. I mean, I'm sorry, the two-tier justice, the two-tier policing, the two-tier criticism is extraordinary. And it's not like he's learned his lessons since last summer and he's really, changed. Only a couple of weeks ago, he was saying that people who were talking about the grooming gangs and how this was an issue with British Pakistani men, which is what it was overwhelmingly, and the people raised this, were far right. He used the phrase again. He does it all the time. I mean, and then he backtracks when there's a backlash. Does he not have a single semblance of sense in his own brain to know not to do this, even if he thinks it himself? And he definitely thinks it. Does he not have a single advisor to say, hey, Prime Minister, don't think you should say that? These aren't off-the-cuff remarks. These are scripted autocue remarks that he makes. They're thought through. They're, by his advisors and by him. And I just don't know for how long you can just keep telling everyone, that they're far right, and then 6 months, a year later say, oh, no, it turns out you were right. And think that you can keep getting away with it.
I mean, this is a big difference as well between the Keir Starmer that supposedly you read about in terms of his advisors, people like Morgan McSweeney, who are said to be more kind of recognising of how far Labour has drifted away from working class people, that they're not going to take up this contempt of their views on immigration and so on. It never filters through to what he actually says and talks about in public. He seems to be incapable, because I think he is still very much a prisoner of a kind of metropolitan liberal groupthink, of just taking these issues head on. And I think he would get a fair amount of plaudits for doing so.
And now reacting as a human being. Reacting as a dad. I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, it's just like my reaction to Southport killings. There's the journalist in me. They say, we're on air. There's something going on. Something going on. I remember we were on air and the truth had emerged just after 1 o'clock. And we were talking about it. And then your horror, and as a journalist, you want to tell the story, but your horror also as a mum. I mean, the idea you take your kid to some great fun holiday camp thing with Taylor Swift, that sort of thing my daughter would have loved to have gone to when she was that age, and that she doesn't come home alive. That I react as a mum then. The Israeli hostages, watching those young women come back and being held by their mothers. I mean, I was in a role raft of tears on Sunday watching that. I don't know how people don't have that reaction. He's a father. I mean, you know, why he doesn't seem to have any normal human emotions. He's always just Mr. Bloody moral judgy, isn't he? He's just Mr. Moral Lawyer, apparently, all the time. And yet somehow immoral, deeply immoral, because he seems to always get these things wrong.
No, absolutely. I think the woodenness comes from, it's not to say that he's not a human being and he's not sincere in his sense of horror at what happened. He just cannot communicate it. And also I think because he's someone who's obviously constantly petrified about the way the media is going to spin him, about the way his remarks are going to be taken, which is ironic because he always seems to put his foot in it. Yeah. He comes across as incredibly insincere as a consequence. And also I think when you're a politician...
because he is.
But also because when you're a politician who doesn't really believe in very much, aside from I quite like to be Prime Minister and I don't like Jeremy Corbyn or whatever, it's very difficult to be a sure-footed public speaker because you don't actually know what you think. You don't actually know what you stand for. You don't really know what you're.
So you can't just go, sod the autocue. Listen, this is what I think.
From one talking point to another. And that's what we've got.
Look, I also want to talk more about Trump in this quick section as well. So much to talk about in terms of the executive orders that he signed yesterday. I mean, a lot of the websites this morning, newspapers already out of date. Obviously, the inauguration just went on for, as far as I can tell, about 47 days. Lots of dresses, lots of hats. I mean, he went from rally to rally, speech to speech. They ran about, I think, an hour late by the end. 3 different balls, 3 first dances. Everyone looked lovely. All went very well. The main thing is what was actually announced is going to make a difference, not just to the American people, but to the world. And I think, as we are very much downstream from American politics, one would hope it would filter down here, although I have no expectation that Labour will take on any of this, and maybe will do what the Democrats have done and just double down on their madness. But executive orders regarding border control, net zero, drilling, drill baby drill, energy security, withdrawing from the World Health Organization, freeze on government hirings, government efficiency, barring government censorship, defence, building the Iron Dome, like similar to Israel. Basically, there are only 2 sexes. Sex and gender used to mean the same thing. There's just 2 sexes or 2 genders. Everything else doesn't exist. Male, female, end of, that's it. Ending all DEI, critical race theory in government offices. No federal funding for teaching children lies that they're born in the wrong body. I mean, I'm loving all of this. No, not yet an order on tariffs. Renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. I care not a jot about these things. But in terms of stuff, policy, energy policy, economic policy, immigration policy on sanity, about biology. Those are very encouraging moves, are they not?
Oh, no, absolutely. And they're a kind of statement of intent, I think. Not only that these issues that really animated and brought together is based, which is quite disparate, different parts of the country, different ethnicities and so on, but a lot of those cultural issues really united them, as well as a lot of the bread and butter ones as well, is to say that we're actually going to do something about this. I think populists, sometimes rightly, sometimes unfairly, are often accused of making a lot of noise about certain issues and then not really delivering on them. So I think this flurry of executive orders is a statement of intent. Yeah. And as you say, it'll be interesting to see whether or not they can actually fortify those things for the longer term.
Well, I mean, again, there is a lot of executive power, and I know one of the things he wants to do is very unlikely. We'll probably need a constitutional changes. The birthright to citizenship. Say, if you are born in America, even if you're a child of illegal migrants, and literally, mum pops over the border for you to give birth, you're entitled to US citizenship, and also ends up obviously a lot of those parents being able to stay as a result. Wants to end that. I doubt really whether he's going to get the support for that, and that's kind of really a side shift. But it's going to be fascinating to watch as these deportations, we understand, are beginning today. But again, same here in the UK. Why are people thinking it's bad or wrong or immoral or cruel to deport people who've got no right to be in your country? It's quite, you either believe in borders or you don't. They believe in borders when it comes to Ukraine, but bizarrely don't believe in borders when it comes to their own country.
I mean, one of the most disastrous things for the Democrats, for large sections of the Labour Party, the centre-left more broadly, is its embrace, not simply of migration, but illegal migration, to be relaxed about it, to think it's not really a big deal, to be willfully naive as to the idea that if you have porous borders, that bad actors might exploit them, that you might end up with a lot of dangerous people in your country, that you might just become a route through which actually organised gangs and cartels could exploit your own weaknesses at the border in order to operate and inflict misery, not just in their own countries, but also within your country as well. This has done it for various governments of the kind of centrist to centre-left makeup across the piece now. The only ones that are clinging on in places like Denmark are ones that have recognised that you cannot continue on along this route. And even though there might be areas in which Donald Trump has seemed to go too far in the other direction, to be too callous, to be too over the top about this, the only reason he's been put in power is because of the fundamental failure to do the basics where borders and legal migration is concerned.
And again, there was awful, those images, you know, kids in cages, was absolutely horrific. The fact that it was also done by Obama completely seemed to escape the American media's notice. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all the big stories we're talking about. You know, Rachel from Accounts travelling to Davos. Love to hear your thoughts on that, but particularly want to hear from you on Southport, what Keir Starmer's had to say about there wasn't a cover-up, but also Donald Trump and those executive orders. Do give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number. We'll get your calls up next. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater still with me as well. Let's go straight to your phone calls, 0344 499 1000. I think we can safely say, to summarise this morning, Keir Starmer, if you're watching, love, and you really should watch or listen to this show, you would learn so much more than what any of your advisors are saying. I'm not entirely sure that your version of events about what happened post-Southport attack, or indeed pre-Southport attack by Axel Rudapakala, has gone down very well with the general public. I'm not sure you are reading the room as well as you and your little advisors think you are, that you might need to think again. And I look forward to the next time the next thing happens and you just shout at us all that we're far right, and then a few months later you come back and tell us that we're not after all, because apparently today we are right to be angry. But don't worry, last summer, me, you, all of us were far right. Let's go to Jennifer. She's in Ashford. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi,
Hello.
Julia.
What do you want to say, my love?
Well, I'm very angry. Keir Starmer, I'm 84. I've suffered a lot under this government. I've never known such a terrible government. I've seen them all come and go.
Yeah.
And this morning, this speech is just a cover-up. This inquiry they're calling is just to defer the gang inquiry that we need desperately in this country for these children.
I mean, doesn't him announce this inquiry undermine his refusal to have an inquiry into the grooming gangs?
Yes, that's all it is. Because he knows that this general inquiry was happened under the Conservative government, and everything they do, they blame the last government.
Yeah.
I admit the last government had a lot of failings, so that's why I didn't vote.
They were useless.
Actually, yes, they were. I voted.
But in what way do you think it's a cover-up?
Because he's just. Oh, I shouldn't say the word BS.
Don't get me taken off air.
Well, no, but everything he says is a cover-up. Everything he says, everything they do, the way they imprison people for saying things on social media, people that are in prison for years because they happen to say something naughty on social media. Yeah. It's just a lie. The whole government is a lie. They're all underqualified. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what the next step is. Believe me, I've lived 84 years, Julia. I've got a lot of psychology in my head. I know what's going on.
They're just not very good. They're not very good, and they think that we're awful, don't they? That's one of my things.
They think we're stupid.
Yeah. No, and bad. And bad.
Are stupid. Yes. Yeah. And the other comment, just one other before I go on my rant.
You go for
is how many terrorists are we bringing in on these boats? Do we know?
No, I think that's rather the point, isn't it? We don't know. But don't worry, they're all a fighting age. I think you'll find, Jennifer, if you check, they are all engineers, physicists and brain surgeons.
Right.
Who miraculously have qualified at the age of 20.
Fine, thanks.
I mean, you know, I'm just telling you what I'm told. Jennifer, I appreciate your call. Thank you very much indeed. Dave is in London, wants to have his say. Dave, what do you want to say?
Hi, Julia. I wanted to talk about the parents, but a couple of quick things on Starmer's speech.
Yeah.
When you listen to it, you can almost transpose it. If he'd have said that after the grooming gangs, everything he said would have actually related to what the grooming gangs did.
Yep.
Which is quite odd, you know. And then the second thing on his speech, in terms of drawing a line in the sand, I've just driven down to Dover, and I've just drawn a line in the sand and put no more boats here, please. But I suspect by this afternoon that line will have been crossed. But I want to talk about the parents. You said earlier, you know, why didn't the parents do this, that, and the other? I don't think we should start moving any of this towards the parents. If this kid had 3 prevent issues going on, then if I were the parents, I would think there's not much point me reporting this to PC Plod of Southport.
The authorities know already, and they're not doing anything.
They know everything already, and by the way, we'll probably find out they were just as scared of him as everybody else was. And so I just think, I know people sort of go, well, if I were the parents, I would have shocked him and all that stuff. He has been shot 3 or 4 times.
That is a very fair point. But that said, if the father was so terrified a week beforehand of his son getting in a taxi and begging the taxi driver, do not take my son, begging him not to go to school, they knew the stuff that was on his computer, the stuff he was obsessed with. And it's not like they found it out since. The reports, you know, neighbours, friends saying, oh, he was obsessed with this stuff. I just find it extraordinary that more action wasn't taken. But there has never been a case of any major terror attack, and it is a terror attack. That was a terror attack. There is never any instance where these people are not known to authorities. It's never, you know. I've used the example of Tom Slater, poor man, sitting here in the studio. You're not going to see a story next week that out of the blue, Tom Slater, no history, the Czech history, no history, has just suddenly decided to go on a rampage, killing a load of people. You're not going to see that. Every time they've been following them, they know them, they're worried about who their contacts are, what they're looking on their computer, they've been reported to authorities. Every single time. We clearly don't have a system to keep ourselves safe.
No, but that's fine in hindsight. But there are plenty of criminals that have gone under the radar for years where people haven't known what they're like. I mean, he's not likely to have gone to his parents and said, hey, can I just show you on my computer all the things I've been looking at?
No, it was he talked with friends and neighbours. That's been, people who know him have been saying that he was obsessed with genocide and violence, watched beheadings. He would talk about it with people.
My point was the parents. My kids do all of that sort of stuff.
Do they?
But they don't, no, not that. But I mean, my kids do all sorts of things without telling me a damn thing. So their friends know a lot more about them than I do. So I just think we have to lay off the parents a little bit and not bring them into this.
No, I'm not blaming them. But I'm telling you what, I mean, again, we like to take credit when our kids do good things. Maybe we need to have a little bit of responsibility. But again, if they kept reporting him to authorities and nothing was happening, here's a giveaway. If social workers won't enter your house without the police being present, maybe the authorities need to be acting sooner, that's for sure. But Dave, I really appreciate your point. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater, do you want to come on that? I do not think Tom Slater is going to commit a horrendous crime.
Thank you for that vote.
I mean, I'm more likely to do it, to be fair.
It's one of those things of, what could have been done sooner, what could have intervention have been made. I think the reason it feels so bang to rights in this instance is because of those 3 prevent referrals, because of the fact that it was quite clear that there was fears about him not only being into some weird ideas but potentially being a particularly violent and angered and depraved individual. And we've seen cases like this. I mean, there was that shooting in Plymouth a few years ago, which was kind of chalked up as a kind of incel shooting. But in that case, you had again a kind of an individual who was clearly deranged, who had recently been given his firearm back to him. You just think, why is there always this paper trail of just stupid decisions, which are not necessarily
incompetence.
Exactly. A lot of it's kind of computer says no incompetence, but still, these are people's lives that we're talking about. And when the authorities have been given ample opportunity to intervene, and there hasn't been that kind of intervention, you are able to ask the question, why wasn't this?
And when in other scenarios they seem to have extraordinary powers to arrest people, to take people into custody, to control people's lives, and yet they're not used in these circumstances. Tom Slater, thank you very much. Your thoughts, always welcome. 0344 499 1000. Up next, we are going to be talking to a former Labour advisor about Rachel from Accounts travelling to Davos, and more about obviously what Keir Starmer had to say today. We'll also be talking to barrister Natasha Hausdorff of UK Lawyers for Israel about what Donald Trump's arrival in the White House means for the future of Israel. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's go to our next guest now. Richard Powerside is a former Labour advisor and joins us. Very good morning to you, Richard.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us.
Former Labour official, I should say.
Sorry?
Former Labour official rather than advisor.
I mean, does that... OK, fair enough. All right, then, big difference.
I wouldn't want to suggest that I was taking on somebody else's job. That's
OK, very, very fair enough. Two topics I want to talk to you about in particular today. Obviously, first up, Keir Starmer's address to the nation today. He says basically, he was aware of, that Axel Rudabakana had been, the Southport killer had been referred to Prevent on 3 separate occasions. He was aware of these terror links. He later, with questions, was admitted, yes, this was an act of terror where these 3 little girls and 8 others were stabbed. 3 little girls died. But he said there hasn't been a cover-up. He also said that people were right to be angry. Why did he think last summer, do you think, that people who were angry were all far right?
That's not what he said. Last summer, he said that he talked about far-right thuggery. Yeah, so he was talking about people who were violent being far-right. And that seems like a very reasonable thing to me. I want to pick you up on this thing about him saying yesterday that it was an act of terrorism, because that's become a big part of the debate, one of the things that Nigel Farage has picked up on. Look, he's made the decision as a leader to describe that as an act of terrorism. He has every right to do that. But the police have still not actually classed it as terrorism, as far as I'm aware. And they've done that on the basis of the evidence they've got. I mean, some people are saying that they think this terrible, terrible crime was like the act of a really mad, ill person as opposed to the act of a terrorist. Now, you can make a philosophical question or whatever about what the difference between those things is. But the point is, the police have never at any point said that they're sure it was a terror event.
Except that he possessed ricin, and had made ricin, but also he possessed an Al-Qaeda terrorist manual. Now, the key thing about that is he's admitted guilt of owning that manual, downloading it. The act of doing that is a terror offence.
So I'm not disagreeing with you about whether or not we think he's terrorist, or whether or not I personally think.
I mean, I wonder if this matters to those 3 little girls' mums. Does this matter?
Well, that's a completely different... OK, but you're talking about 2 different things here, right? And these are really important differences, because the accusation of a cover-up is predicated on the idea that somebody should have... that the government should have said, when these terrible murders happened, that a terrorist act had taken place. And the point is that the police, at no point, have said that they thought that they had evidence that the murders were a terrorist event. Not that he was...
Except they did have evidence, because they found ricin in a terrorist manual, which they didn't mention for 3 months and only charged with him much later on.
And the police have to be incredibly careful about what information they release.
You are allowed to say you charge someone with these offences. What's interesting is when you haven't charged them with those offences, when most people would have expected those would have been part of the charges.
It's incredibly important that we don't mix up very, very different things here, right? You're asking me to talk about Keir Starmer and what the government's chosen to do, and now you're talking about the police and what the police
you're talking about the police. You're saying the police. I'm asking you about Keir Starmer. I'm asking about the political decision of what...
You asked me about Keir Starmer.
Yes, and you talked about the police. Richard, I'm not sure we're getting very...
Because we talked about the definition of a terror offence and what Starmer had said about that. And I'm trying to talk about the ridiculous accusations that have been made and show how they don't have a factual basis. And the way that people manage to make these conspiracy theories seem like they're sticking is by mixing up very different things.
OK. One of the things he said was this case needs to be a line in the sand, and that the failures to prevent this murder and this man's actions leaps off the page. And he says the government will, in the inquiry, ask and answer difficult questions unburdened by cultural and institutional sensitivities. Why would there be a public inquiry into the Southport attack, but not a public inquiry into the grooming gangs, when only a few weeks ago Keir Starmer was talking about how those who were talking about the issues regarding largely Pakistani British men perpetrating grooming gangs against white working class women in up to 50 cities around the country, how they were also far right. Now, the very words that had meant that there weren't investigations, that people didn't come forward, and that these men were able to continue their mass rape and abuse of these girls for so long because of these so-called cultural and institutional sensitivities. He's a bit of a hypocrite, isn't he?
So what, as in you're asking, why is there a national inquiry into one and not into the other?
I'm asking, he's a hypocrite, isn't he?
No, there's an inquiry into one because there's a national institution or national institutions that may have failed, for instance, the Prevent programme, that needs to have a national inquiry into it. The Alexis J inquiry into sexual predation against children has already looked at the national elements of the grooming gang.
No, it hasn't. No, it didn't.
And the local councils where failures appear definitely to have been made with regards to grooming are where there is an appropriate place to have those inquiries, because that's where we think the failures have been made.
OK, well, I mean, again, a lot of people would argue that's simply not the case. And as Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, made the point, it's about joining the dots, that this is something that happened, across so many towns and cities for so long.
Kemi Badenoch, who was in government for several years.
Abject failings by the last Tory government.
Isn't it? She's suddenly leader of the opposition. Oh, suddenly she cares about these things. Come on.
She had, she made a point in PMQs that she had actually spoken about this. But I agree with you. Abject failings by the Tory government over many of these years. I've made that very clear on air repeatedly.
We think that governments led by Boris Johnson and Liz Truss were scared of doing something that might offend cultural sensitivities. It's just stupid. It's embarrassing. It's nonsense made up by a bunch of people who are flailing around for things to say on Twitter. That's what the Tory party is these days.
OK. A lot of people will probably agree with you on a lot of that. Do you think, though, from what you know, that there has been a failure by organisations to actually deal with the issue of Axel Rudy Cabana? And do you think that actually a lot of the concerns that people were raising back in, late July and early August last summer were legitimate concerns, given what we know now?
There's just so many different things in your question there. Have there been failings? Well, obviously there have been failings. 3 children were murdered. Were things that people said in July legitimate? And people said a lot of different things in July. But if we're asking, is violence more likely to be committed by people from migrant backgrounds? No, it's not. And is migration a wonderful thing for our country that's been happening for an incredibly long time and makes us more diverse and more strong? Yes, it is.
By the way, is violence more likely to be committed by migrants from certain backgrounds and certain regions? Absolutely it is, in terms of criminality from people from certain regions and certain countries. Statistically, this is absolutely clear.
Not true. When you adjust for class, that's not true. We know the crime is very closely related to socioeconomic status, which isn't very surprising. People who are screwed over by our economy are much more likely to experience trauma, to do terrible things. It's not very surprising, is it? We have an incredibly unfair society, and people who suffer end up imposing suffering on other people.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to disagree on some of that. I want to get to one final point, though. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, otherwise known as Rachel from Accounts, is travelling to Davos today, to the World Economic Forum. When she was in opposition, being much feted, she was asked to give keynote speeches, appearing on panels. This week, not been invited to do a single speech, not appearing on a single stage on a panel. Clearly, no one seems to want to know what she thinks about anything when it comes to the British economy. We've seen unemployment up to 4.4%. She's desperately trying to get some investment and growth for the UK, and we've seen very low growth levels. We're virtually stagnant right now, as some other economies, like America, look like they're about to really take off. Has Rachel Reeves been sort of, I suppose, exposed as a failing Chancellor?
I think you've been slightly misinformed there, Julia, because actually Rachel Reeves was invited to make a speech, and she decided not to.
Not to. Why would she decide not to make a speech?
Because at Davos, that's not, frankly, the most important or useful thing to do. Like, what she's been really focused on is not doing these, like, huge set-piece, here I am events. She's been doing things which are actually useful to the British economy, like going and talking to the important people around the world who might bring a bit of cash into the UK economy. I think that's a great thing to be doing.
I mean, she did a great job in China, didn't she? Multi-billion-pound economy, and she got a whole £600 million of investment. I mean, whoopity-doo-dah.
These events are not about having a headline where you can say, oh, look, how much money I got in, like, a kind of one-day visit. It's about building up relationships, and it's incredibly difficult right now for us to make sure that we, on the one hand, are creating those firewalls between the UK economy and the Chinese economy that keep us safe and secure. And on the other hand, we don't just immediately upend all of our trade relationships. That's something that requires the highest level political relationships to be maintained, but being maintained in a careful way. That's what Reeves was doing in Beijing.
Richard Parasite, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate you joining us, former Labour official Richard there. 11:48 is the time. A very brief word from Tom Slater.
I just like the idea that Rachel Reeves or any of the Labour government are capable of this kind of high-level wire act diplomacy, given the fact that they can barely keep the news grid.
I mean, maybe she's playing chess with people. I don't know.
If she is, it's a very
She might
long
be
game.
handling complaints. She might be working on the desk in Information and Complaints Department at Davos, and that's what she's doing. So that would be useful.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just making suggestions, because making speeches is definitely not useful, apart from when they make speeches, and it is. Again, so difficult to keep up, Tom. 11:48 is the time. Up next, we're going to talk to Natasha Hausdorff about what the latest in Israel and the ceasefire with Hamas, and indeed, what does Trump's presidency mean for the future of the Middle East? This is Talk.
on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is indeed Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 11:52 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's go straight now to Natasha Hausdorff. She's a barrister and a member of UK Lawyers for Israel and has been a regular guest on this show throughout the horrific period of since the October 7th massacre, and joins us now. A very good morning to you, Natasha.
Good morning, Julia.
I have to say, I'm sure you, like me, had shed a few tears on Sunday as we saw the release of those 3 hostages, including a British hostage from Hamas's clutches. Extraordinary scenes in Gaza and extraordinary scenes watching them greeted by their mothers. We still want another 30 to come home in this first phase of this ceasefire deal. And indeed, it's thought some 60 of the 94 remaining are still alive, wanting both the alive and the dead to be returned to their families. Ceasefire has begun, has kept going in Gaza. What are your thoughts? What are your hopes and fears about this ceasefire deal? Whether it will continue, whether there will be a lasting peace, and whether you'll get all the hostages home?
Well, as President Trump referred to it yesterday, it is a temporary ceasefire. It's due to progress in stages, and certainly the rate at which hostages are set to be released. Hamas has just announced 4 women it intends to release on Saturday. It hasn't provided the names yet, but this very slow, staggered release does indeed suggest that Hamas is continuing to play for time.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right that the emotion, I think, around the world at the release of these 3 young women, stories that their stories have been followed by many. And I think certainly in Israel, there's a strong sense of all of these hostages being very much part of everyone's family, adoptive family. So the emotion is significant, but Israel is, of course, also extremely divided about this, what some have called a deal, some others have called extortion. And the families of victims of terror attacks who have seen the perpetrators of these attacks be released in exchange have likewise been extremely emotional about developments.
Well, indeed. I mean, it's a very, very high ransom to pay to get these people back. I mean, those first 3 women released in return for 90 prisoners. I mean, some detainees, but we know that some of the prisoners to release, about 1,000 overall from Israeli jails, are convicted, terrorists, rapists, murderers, very, very, very dangerous men. And we know Yahya Sinwar, the man who orchestrated the Hamas attack on October the 7th, was himself previously a prisoner, released in a similar such deal. It's a very, very high price to be paid. I wonder if it wasn't a member of my family, if that would be a price I would be willing to pay. There have been lots of jubilation at the release of prisoners, but also at the bomb stopping falling in Gaza. Of course, they never needed to be falling if, of course, Hamas hadn't attacked on October the 7th in the first place. What hopes do you have, though, that this will hold, given, it turns out, guess what? Terrorists can't be trusted. I know it's a surprise to everyone, but it's also given the pressures on the Netanyahu government as well. And how much does Trump's arrival in the White House change things?
Well, certainly, I think everything changed yesterday, and we saw in the first day of his presidency, Trump and his team showed more understanding of the situation in the Middle East than the last 4 years of the Biden administration demonstrated. I think it's important to note that this much was perhaps acknowledged by the former Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, when only a couple of weeks ago he admitted that America's policy, especially over the last 15 months, towards the crisis in the Middle East, has emboldened Hamas, that the so-called daylight that he described between Israel and America, in fact, probably scuppered previous hostage deals. And what we've seen is a complete reversal, even in the first day of the Trump presidency, with a series of executive orders that were signed yesterday. But I think very importantly, a recognition that there is going to be a new approach to the Middle East, one which will undoubtedly serve the Palestinians far better than the Biden administration, not just the Israelis. When we consider that the emboldening of Hamas has wreaked this devastation that you've described in Gaza, which was I agree, entirely unnecessary. Embolden Hamas, worsen the situation for the Palestinians in Gaza. Well, as many people have been saying, there is a new sheriff in town. The policy, I think we can all understand, is going to go back to that which ultimately gave us the Abraham Accords, and that is something to be celebrated.
But again, we've seen, the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, absolutely clear. Just, Defense Secretary, destruction of Hamas, end of. They want every last Hamas fighter dead. There isn't a moderate version of Palestinian leadership. There is less extreme than Hamas, but by no means moderate leadership. We also know that most of the Palestinian groups in the Middle East don't actually want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. That one state does not involve Israel or indeed Jewish people existing at all. So how is this going to come out? How are we going to establish any peace in the Middle East? Whether this ceasefire deal holds in Gaza or not, whether the reconstruction money goes in, whether or not Hamas is able to rebuild or not, how do we actually get to proper, long-lasting peace?
Well, you're absolutely right that the Palestinian leadership across the board is perfectly clear about its genocidal aims. You mentioned Yahya Sinwar, the orchestrator of the 7th of October attacks. Also Ali Kadi, the head of the Nukhba force, who worked very closely in planning over a course of 2 years, was also released in the Gilad Shalit deal. Their salaries as released prisoners continued to be paid by the Palestinian Authority.
That tells you everything.
As the moderates in this equation.
They're the moderates. But that's the thing. Like, we've only got about sort of 20 seconds left. Do you see, like, in 5 years' time that we have peace in the Middle East? This is all over?
Ultimately, I think it depends on America leading a change in attitude and perspective in the West, around the world, a recognition of the real issues here, which are these genocidal aims, indoctrination, and the pay-for-slay salary system that incentivizes terror. Without that changing, I'm afraid we're going to continue along the same vein. But I am optimistic that this change in leadership can have significant consequences for a change in attitude across the West.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Natasha Halsdorf from Tom Slater. A lot of this is about backing Israel and not giving succor to Hamas and not funding Hamas as effectively the West has been doing for the last 20 years.
No, absolutely. You can only hope that change is one that we're going to witness. Donald Trump obviously rhetorically very behind Israel, but with this hostage deal as an example, does sometimes politics and the desire to get something over the line interfere with that.
We will talk more about this and lots more besides on all of the big topics of the day. Do stay tuned. We're going to talk more about Trump up next. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Very much appreciate your company, whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device. You haven't tried any of the other ones of those, you are welcome to do so. But it is great to have you join us. Talked so much today already about Southport, and in particular, Keir Starmer addressing the nation this morning, admitting that he knew Axel Rudolph had terror links in the wake of the Southport attack. The Prime Minister has said the tragedy must be a line in the sand for Britain. Of course, we've got a national inquiry into the attacks. It's funny we get a national inquiry into, but we don't get a national inquiry into, like the grooming gangs. Isn't it strange? We're also going to be talking a lot more about Donald Trump. He declared the golden age of America begins right now in his inauguration speech as the 47th President of the United States yesterday. He said that there were sweeping changes coming to immigration, economic policy, climate policy. He's withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement, the World Health Organization, and very controversially, a full pardon for more than 1,500 Capitol rioters on January the 6th. Well, we'll talk all about that in just a few minutes as well. Also, later in the show, the fabulous, the brilliant Professor Carl Hennigan is going to be on air talking to us about, pardons from Joe Biden for Anthony Fauci, a man who, frankly, there's an awful lot of evidence had helped provide the funding to the Wuhan lab to actually develop the COVID virus that killed so many and ruined so many lives. Plus, the Chief Medical Officer, yes, he's still Chief Medical Officer, Sir Chris Whitty, told the COVID inquiry yesterday that he was sceptical about having mandated COVID vaccines for healthcare workers, stating the decision was 100% a political one. Nice of you to mention it now, Chris. Nice of you to bother. Anyway, all that is coming up. Hope you'll stay tuned for all of that. Tom Slater's still with me. We've locked him in the studio, so he has to stay. But he's editor at Spiked Online. I know you're going to, I've talked a lot about COVID over the years. Sometimes it was all we talked about. We'll come to that a little bit later. Before we go to our next guest on Trump, I want to talk more about Trump, and in particular, actually, conversation we were just having with Natasha Hausdorff about what Trump's influence is going to be on the world stage. The two key issues people have been talking about are Ukraine war, what's been happening in the Middle East, but of course he's also got to deal with China. Interesting that the president of China, Xi Jinping, was invited to the inauguration but didn't attend. Keir Starmer would have loved to go, wouldn't he, but wasn't invited. But also related to Ukraine and other aspects, Vladimir Putin. The president said yesterday he was going to be having a meeting soon with Vladimir Putin. What do you think his impact's going to be?
Well, I think what we're seeing here is essentially either a changing of tack or maybe just a full realisation of what his foreign policy always was, because there was this general sense that Donald Trump is just a kind of isolationist. It's about America just kind of folding within its own borders, ignoring everything else that's going on in the world. That's clearly not what he's angling for here. It's very much, it's not a return to the kind of liberal humanitarian interventionism where America feels the need to interpose itself into all kinds of different conflicts, to depose all kinds of different regimes. But it's very much about the willingness to intervene in a quite muscular way when they see something conflicting with American national interests. The question is how much of this is bluster and an opening negotiating gambit, or is it really genuinely going to be backed up?
Well, he just says he's going to stop all the wars.
There's stopping all the wars. There's the questions about Greenland, there's the questions about Panama and whatever. How much of this is bluster and self-aggrandisement? How much of it is the opening gambit in some kind of broader negotiation? And will he actually be able to achieve any of these aims? All of that's up for grabs, but it's clearly this isn't an American president that wants to cut himself off from the world, I guess, is the way it's kind of
which is interesting, actually, because, well, actually every American president's been elected on an isolationist agenda. It tends not to work out that way. Well, thank you very much indeed for that. I also want to hear your thoughts on Southport and indeed on anything we're talking about related to Trump. I mean, again, so many big stories this week, but Keir Starmer admitting in a press conference this morning that he knew that Axel Ruda had terror links. He'd been referred to prevent on 3 occasions in the wake of the Southport attack. But, of course, that was when he was telling everyone they were far right. for being angry. Now it's okay. Now we're right to be angry. But he's insisted there was no cover-up. What is your reaction to that? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk, then your message to 87222. You can also send us a message on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1. Standard network rate message. Right now, let's go to our next guest. Gwenda Blair joins us now. She is a Trump biographer. Her book is The Trumps: Three Generations of Builders and a President. And indeed, Gwenda, you'll have to update, and a president twice over. A very good afternoon to you.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it was a very long day yesterday, that's for sure. That inauguration, I mean, I felt like it was going on for the full 4 years of the presidency, as they often do. For a man of 78, he's certainly pretty darn sprightly. I was saying earlier, I know 28-year-olds who couldn't have managed the day that he managed. What did you make of what he had to announce on his first day in his inauguration speech in particular?
Well, I think there's so many things to note. One of them would be he sort of gave two speeches. He gave the first one in the Capitol, Rotunda, and then he gave a sort of informal one to his supporters.
Rather less scripted, yes.
So why settle for just one when you could have two? And in the first one had certainly a very light coating of unity and going forward and reaching out slightly, and then over a very light coating of that, and then a kind of a redo of the American Carnage speech that he gave his first time when he was being
I mean, again, for people who don't watch these things closely, it's very unusual. Normally the message is all, you go back to, JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. It's always much more forward-looking, whereas he has, in both his inauguration speeches, second one in particular yesterday, talked a lot about, the campaign, used the sort of campaign narrative and language, which is quite unusual in this scenario. Should we watch listen to a few clips, in particular when he announced what his numerous executive orders were going to be about? Let's watch and listen to what he had to say.
Today I will sign a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. It's all about common sense.
Now, he then went on to talk about, things like basic biological fact that's going to be recognised by the federal government. Here's what he said about that.
I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
Now, there's no doubt at all, Gwenda, that would very much have appealed to his base. It absolutely appeals to me. How much of what he says, from what you know about him as his biographer, does he wholeheartedly believe himself, and how much is he just sort of, playing to his crowd, playing to his base?
Well, playing to a crowd is his brand. That's been what he's done since for the last 50 years. Is to perform as a successful real estate magnate, and then reality TV star, and now basically, president of the world. Some might say
not quite. No, not yet. I mean, but do you? I mean, in your writing about him, your research, does he believe in anything? I remember things like, in this first time around in 2016, he was asked about, what was his favourite passage from the Bible? He was very much courting, the Christian evangelical side of the Republican Party. And he said, they're all so good, so good. He could, he's not a Bible reader. You can't say that in American politics. There are lots of things he says. Do you think he believes in anything? Are there any sort of core beliefs that you believe he does have?
He believes in Donald Trump. I mean, I don't think anyone to dispute that. That is the major, evaluation system. Is it good for Donald Trump? That's all. That's the bar anything has to get over.
And how important? How important is it to him to be popular? Because, I mean, America is divided and has been, let's face it, it didn't just start with Donald Trump, it started long before that, but so divided now between, the left and the right. And he is absolutely loved and adored and worshipped. People believe that God saved him from that first assassination attempt so he could be president. And there are people who think, God, our own foreign secretary a few years back was saying, he was a KKK sympathizer and Nazi. Some people think he's the worst thing that could happen to the world. What does he make of that?
He wants everybody to be watching. That's the most important part. Is everyone to be tuned in for him to be the center of attention 24/7, 365 days a year. And he has been remarkably successful. Biden was president, yeah, but the story was Trump.
Yeah.
Even when he wasn't sitting.
You're right. For the last 6 months, it's pretty been all about Trump. And certainly the media, on this 24/7 cycle, with Donald Trump's tweets back in 2016, in his first term in office, and his Truth Social posts now, and his statements now, he can garner that support, and you sort of race from one thing to another. Is there anything sort of in terms of the economic policy that is kind of fundamental? Because I want to play another clip, which is the urge to drill, baby, drill, and this is all about you go back to the old lines, it's the economy, stupid, and a lot of people might have been voting on woke issues or on other issues, and immigration a huge factor as well. But that's also an economic story. But so much of it comes down to the economy and getting cheap, available energy. Let's have a little watch and listen to what he had to say about that.
Today, I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill. We will be a rich nation again, and it is that liquid gold under our feet that will help to do it. With my actions today, we will end the Green New Deal and we will revoke the electric vehicle mandate industry, and keeping my sacred pledge to our great American auto workers.
How much do you think does he want to have a success, Gwenda Blair, in his presidency this time round, because he can't stand again under the Constitution? How important is it to him that he has a legacy and how he's remembered in the future?
Well, in theory anyway, starting now, it's all about his legacy. Because, as you just said, he's legally prohibited from running again for a second term. For a third term. He's in the second term. He is, as we say, a lame duck. He's not a very lame duck. He's doing his best to show that he's actually.
He's not a lame duck. He controls both houses of Congress, the White House, and he's got a Supreme Court that is on his side as well.
Not only that, he has the tech world, who were very prominently featured in the inauguration, very prominently visible right behind him.
Seated in front of his cabinet, interestingly.
In front of the cabinet, elected officials, governors, they are out, in the vestibule. They're not even in the room. They were watching from elsewhere. It's the tech titans who he wanted to show them off and to show that they are, well, should we say in his corner? Should we say in his pocket? Or just say on his side?
Yeah, well, for now anyway. Great to talk to you, Gwenda Blair, Trump biographer, author of The Trumps, 3 Generations, Builders and a President. Thank you for that. Let's come back to Tom Slater in the studio. Tom, in terms of the announcements, yes, the executive orders, a lot of focus today on the pardoning of some 1,500 plus January 6 rioters. We'll come to that in a moment. But in terms of the most significant announcements he made, what do you think they were? Was it about border control? Was it about the economy and energy? Was it about, DOGE and government efficiency and a freeze on hiring? Where do you think the most significant statements were?
Well, I think the ones that have certainly cut through because they were so crucial to his campaign, certainly the question of immigration. That is something which really can't be underestimated in terms of how important it was to getting him over the line. The sense of that had gone completely completely off the rails. The announcement in relation to what he called there only being two genders, but really, hopefully, there are only two sexes, and that everything else.
Also, gender and sex used to be the same thing until everyone started inventing mad ones.
Everything got a lot more confusing. Within that, I think also the baby drill announcement around basically dismantling the Green New Deal, actually exploiting the huge natural resources that America has. And just kind of really shoving the whole energy discussion very firmly in the direction towards essentially exploiting the energy that you have available rather than impoverishing yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mind-blowing idea. Isn't that what governments used to do? I couldn't believe when I was watching the inauguration speech, the contrast between what European governments are currently doing, not just EU governments, most of them, but Britain as well, and Ireland in particular as well, but compared with what he's doing. I mean, Canada's the same, Australia has been mad as well. Just this urge to, again, policies to make, you make yourself energy insecure, to ruin your manufacturing, ruining your ability to defend yourself, because if you can't make steel and things, you can't defend yourself. It's really that basic. And to impoverish your people, I just found utterly extraordinary. To give away power to international organisations like the World Health Organization and the like, who've proved themselves to be completely in cahoots with China. I mean, their behaviour over COVID was absolutely shocking. I mean, they should have been disbanded straight away on the basis of that. It seems there's so many things. I mean, I do think that Donald Trump is fundamentally, as Gwendolyn said, Donald Trump's about Donald Trump. But if along the way he's going to do some really good, sensible things, are we going to be hoping that, we're downstream? I mean, certainly on the issue like the gender madness, the critical race theory madness that has taken over the whole of the British media, the whole of British institutions, quangos, most frankly, most HR departments in most buildings, in most companies, it councils, schools, hospitals, it is everywhere. Do you think that we are going to be seeing a change here, or do you think that the left, because it is a left thing, are going to just double down and it's going to get even worse?
I mean, I think maybe we could see both being true at the same time. There'll be sections of the left, as we've seen with the ridiculous comments over the past 24 hours that this was like a far-right rally, Elon Musk was supposedly giving a fascist salute, all of this kind of ridiculous 2016 playbook of let's just demonise them that way. That's still going on.
And also get Taylor Swift out and that'll make everything okay. Yeah.
I think at the same time there is a decent section of, shall we say, the kind of centrist, centre-left class who recognise that the old arguments don't work anymore, and also who, in Donald Trump's America, agree with it, disagree with it, agree with some of it, not all of it. It's a really clear challenge to the consensus they had previously, which would put international agreements over and above the needs of their own people, which would put saving the planet, in inverted commas, over the needs of energy security and cheap and plentiful energy. This is going to be a real challenge now to so many different orthodoxies that so many different governments are signed up to. If America starts to see good results from that,
which they will,
how could it possibly not change the political
one would hope. And in terms of the personality, it's interesting, you see a lot of J.D. Vance, of course, he has to be sworn in before the president, but also an awful lot of Elon Musk. He's invited on stage at a couple of the rallies and he's given speeches. He's clearly, there's a big bromance going on there, but I do wonder, J.D. Vance has very been set up as, the inheritor to Trump, someone who could run for office in 4 years' time. Elon Musk, obviously, he's a multimillionaire. He's trying to send a rocket to Mars. He's not trying to be a president. He's got the ear of the president. I wonder how long you think those relationships last. However well those men do, however popular those two men are, Donald Trump wants it to be about Donald Trump. So how does that work?
Trump likes to have people vying for his attention. He likes to kind of preside over almost like a kind of kingly court where people are trying to get his ear, trying to get his influence. Yeah. He's also someone who doesn't really have an ideology, as kind of instincts. And in some situations that will chime with Elon Musk and his desires to cut down on government or whatever. In other situations, it chimes with a more J.D. Vance position, which is we should court organised labour, we should care about the Rust Belt, we should care about...
Well, he calls grew up poor, not the son of a multimillionaire.
Absolutely. So those I think reflect different sides of Trump's offer.
Yeah.
He likes to play them off against each other, but as we've always seen, there is going to be bust-ups. There are going to be people who end up being sent packing from the administration or end up leaving. The question is which of those two factions, the more kind of libertarian tech bros or the more kind of these new Republicans very interested in the working class issues? Which are all those two?
Well, we know it's always. I mean, let's face it, it's always the billionaires always do well. They'll do fine anyway. I'm going to take a quick call on this, and then we're going to take lots more of your calls coming in about Southport and what Keir Starmer had to say today. But Jackie has called in on 0344 499 1000. She's in Oldham. And Jackie, you wanted to talk about Donald Trump, didn't you?
Yeah, I watched the inauguration yesterday, and what struck me was the fact that he used love of his country, love of the people. He talked about how the people were pioneers and they made America, and with other speakers as well, the people were revered. And then it filled me with hope and optimism. And then you switch 24 hours and I listened to Keir Starmer address the nation, and you get political spin, you get deflection, you get cover-up, and basically gaslighting us again and treating us as though we are stupid. And it makes me realise, I'm envious of America.
I am right now. I am. I'm with you. I mean, look, all presidents, talk about how much they love the country and love the people. I mean, your average American is not a pioneer right now. They were in the past, but they're not right now. But I completely agree with that. That sense of we're going to do this stuff. It's going to be action. We're going to right wrongs. We're going to, in terms of mad economic policy and immigration policy, we're going to actually get stuff done. And we've just not felt any of that from this Labour government.
No, and I think the trouble with the politicians in this country is they talk about serving the public, but it's just platitudes.
Yeah.
I think they think that they are better than us.
Oh, no. They don't think they're better than us, Jackie. They know they are.
Exactly, and this is why they treat us with disdain. And I think if anything comes out of America, it's the fact that we need to get on an equal footing with our politicians and make them realise that they do serve the British people and they get paid well for doing it.
Absolutely, Jackie. Absolutely spot on. Nailed it. Jackie and Oldham, thank you for that. 12:23 is the time. Up next, we're going to take more of your calls about Southport and what Keir Starmer had to say. Want to hear your reaction. He says there was no cover-up about the Southport attack, but yet he did know about his links with terrorism in the aftermath of that attack, in which 3 girls were stabbed to death, 8 others stabbed, and 2 adults as well. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
You know, I mean, he was bashing the previous administration who had to sit there and listen to it, which had to be terribly uncomfortable. He signed a bunch of executive orders, about 100 of them, and they were directly related to his campaign promises. You know, like him or dislike him, it doesn't matter. Eventually, the guy does what he says he's going to do, and you have to appreciate that. And I think that's why the people who voted for him voted for him.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is good afternoon. Sorry, 12:27 is the time. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's get to more of your calls. Lots coming in about Southport, and indeed particularly what the Prime Minister had to say some 4 hours ago. He made a statement, an address to the nation from number 10 Downing Street. Let's go to Laura Jane, who's in Hampshire. Hello, Laura.
Hi, Julia.
Hello. What do you want to say?
Well, I don't want to sound too much like that lovely older lady who said she wanted to have a rant, because I guess mine's a rant too. But I think mine's a rant in the sense that I'm saying what we know, that the whole thing is a cover-up. We know why it's a cover-up. We know that we were all accused of being far right when we brought up the word, it might be a terrorist. All of that. And we know that it's linked to the grooming gangs, because he does not want to lose his Muslim vote. It's as simple as that.
You think it's that simple? But hold on a minute. But why is he having an inquiry into this Southport app, but not into the grooming gangs?
Well, because the grooming gangs is a bigger story. It's absolutely huge, and this is a major. He can come at this. It's one man. They're probably going to say he was nutty, etc., etc. No, it's simple. It's obvious. But my bigger point is a more global point. Is everybody keeps trying to, drill down on Starmer's reasons and why the country's going to pot. And I'm sorry, I'm 64. I during COVID, I went on the first marches that I ever have done in my life. I am, and I admit it, I'm a conspiracy theorist. I believe there is a bigger plot out there, and that he is merely doing a sort of, if you like, he's a sort of communist at heart, but that's not the quite.
Well, I mean, he said he's a socialist, certainly. Now, I've never been a conspiracy theorist. Now, one of the reasons I'm not a conspiracy theorist is because I've met a lot of these people. I don't think they're capable of perpetrating a conspiracy this clever, because they're really not that competent. I'm always a cock-up theorist. I think people then do bad things to cover up their cock-ups. What is the conspiracy that you think has gone on, Laura?
I think that our leaders are in the being ruled by other people. They wanted power. They were given power. The whole thing.
Who are the other people?
Globalists. I'm sorry.
This is sort of WEF type thing.
Very, very evil people out there.
Evil people. This is the whole sort of World Economic Forum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I just have never understood this conspiracy theory. Look, big multi-billionaires and big companies and politicians have been in cahoots for many years. Politicians want their money. Billionaires want the influence. They do things that aren't in the interest of the people, because they're the people they've got the ear of. I don't think it's a conspiracy, though.
Well, if that's not a conspiracy, I don't know what is. If the average person in the street isn't part of the deal, and it's all about money, the pharmaceutical industry, about money. It's been going since the 1920s, where medicine has been, on the rise, and alternative medicines, which now people are realising, you don't have to go to the doctor and get.
No, alternative medicines, the ones that aren't proven and don't work, I'm afraid. No, look, we're going to have to agree to disagree on this one. I absolutely think that a lot of politicians aren't acting in the interest of their people on many, many different policies. I think a lot of them are beholden. Way too too much money in politics on both sides of the Atlantic, and I think a lot, and I don't think the big pharma companies and big olive, they're all sitting there worrying about our needs. I accept all that. I just don't think it's a conspiracy as such. But Lord, I so appreciate your call. Tom, you were sort of smiling through some of that. What's your reaction to that?
No, I think it's always just a bit of a mistake to label these failings, often repeated though they are, as part of some kind of pattern or some kind of conspiracy. I think partly because it also
lets them off.
It does let them off. It lets them off their individual failings. It suggests it's all part of some broader move that is kind of behind the scenes. But also I think it becomes really empowering, disempowering rather, to us as citizens, because it becomes this giant machine that we can't really even see, let alone do anything about.
We're in the Matrix.
Yeah, rather than often, I think that actually the defining feature of the political class these days is how pathetic it is, how it doesn't really know what it stands for, how it's batting around from one issue to another. It's fundamentally incompetent rather than part of some grand move to
that's where I go, but I know a lot of people disagree with us. Let's go to another call. John is in Cumbria and wants to talk about Southport attacks and what Keir Starmer had to say. Good afternoon to you, John.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Afternoon. What do you want to say?
Well, basically, listening to Starmer's speech, the general theme seemed to be those responsible must be held guilty for their responsibility, and it's anyone but me was the general theme.
Yeah.
But one item of responsibility or aspect of responsibility I don't think has been mentioned yet. This guy was identified as young as 13 as being a potential risk.
Yep.
And subsequently 2 further times before he carried out his appalling atrocity.
Yep.
Now, where were the parents in this? He managed to make ricin, it seems, from what we can gather. He actually manufactured ricin himself or obtained it. How was he able to do this without anyone knowing?
Yeah, well, people did know that he was obsessed with death and genocide and violence, and his father was so fearful that he was, a week earlier he tried to stop it, managed to stop him going to his old school where he'd previously carried a knife and previously brought a hockey stick to beat people with. I mean, they knew, didn't they? This is the thing. I don't.
Manufacturing ricin, I wouldn't have a clue where to start. I'm not a chemist.
Well, and my guess is also that his parents had no idea about that. I mean, most parents haven't got a clue what's in their kids', jean pockets, let's be honest, or what's on their phones. But they certainly were aware. And they knew that the authorities knew something. When I mentioned this earlier, a caller made a point a little bit earlier in the show that, look, the parents knew that he'd been reported to Prevent 3 times. They knew, he'd been booted out of school for violence. They knew all this stuff. They're probably thinking, what's the point in reporting him again? He's already in the system and they're not going to do anything.
Yeah, but actually to make ricin, I would imagine, is a fairly involved thing. And where's he doing it? At home somewhere? Yeah. It seems strange to me, and I wasn't aware that his father had actually reported him as little as a week before.
Well, not reported him. We know that his father had prevented it, basically talked to taxi driver out of taking him to he wanted to go to his old school on the final day, and it's now thought he was going to be he basically wanted to follow through on basically a massacre at his old high school. I mean, that's the terrifying thing. But again, this is why he shouldn't have been on the streets. He should never have been able to commit that attack in Southport. John, I so appreciate your call. I want to squeeze in one more call. Mark is on the line. He's in Carlisle. And Mark, you wanted to talk about Donald Trump and the inauguration.
Yeah, the reason Donald Trump is so successful with his straight talking is because he's independent. He's not tied in with the liberal establishment.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have to do policy linked to gravy trains, which is happening all over. Both parties, by the way, Conservative and Labour in this country, are tied in with the liberal elite, and they do policy tied in with gravy trains. One thing, Julia, is with all this going on in America, we are going to look so stupid. The Labour Party is going to paint us as if we're in a prison.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I do think there's going to be such a contrast. But I think that's the same with most of Europe as well, although, of course, they're going to have elections sooner. But again, even a lot of those parties on the right who were trying to do some sensible things on immigration and on net zero, they're going to be kept out of power by, as you say, those liberal elites who'll club together. Mark, thank you very much indeed for that. That's a lot of people saying, oh, Trump, 2016, Trump's not beholden to rich people, but he's putting like a dozen billionaires into his cabinet or something. He likes rich people and he makes policy large. I mean, on taxes, policies are very much for rich people.
I mean, last time around, his great economic achievement was a tax cut for the rich. You could say that was down to the fact that he kind of outsourced a lot of policy to the kind of Republican establishment who can only think about tax cuts for the rich. But you're right, a lot more billionaires around in this time around. The question is, can he deliver for those voters
people,
who put him there
the people
in
who
the first
really
place?
need his help, indeed. 12:35 is the time. We're going to take a break. We're going to talk more about Southport with the former detective superintendent, and we're going to be talking to Professor Carl Hennigan about, pardons for Fauci and what Chris Whitty told the COVID inquiry yesterday about mandatory vaccines for health workers. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is
Talk the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:38 is the time. Let's talk to a former detective superintendent at Scotland Yard, Shabnam Chowdhury now, who joins us to talk about, what we have learned in the last 24 hours about that horrific Southport attack that left 3 little girls dead, 8 others wounded with knife wounds, and 2 adults wounded as well. Shabnam, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, good afternoon, Julia.
Look, when we had the guilty pleas from Axel Rubicana, it was not just a surprise to the media, it was a surprise, we understand, even to his defence lawyers appointed to represent him in this trial, and certainly seemed to be a bit of a surprise to the authorities. Of course, so much more was able to be learnt about this young man and what he had been doing since it appeared at the age of 12 when things started going horribly wrong. What did you make of what the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, had to say, his statement yesterday, but also particularly in his address to the nation this morning about how, yes, he had known things about him and his links with Prevent and reported to Prevent 3 times and concerns about him and his violent past at school, but there had not been a cover-up. Is that fair for him to say?
Well, in my opinion, as a former detective, yes, I do think that's fair to say, and I think that you cannot afford to jeopardise that trial and such a serious trial, any trial for that matter. So yes, he was very clear that he had been made aware of Rubicana's background and history at very quickly after, but because of the restrictions around reporting and, in fairness, to have a fair trial, what he's done is called a public inquiry, which I think is really, really good, because the failings in this are absolutely catastrophic, and I think that had there been some joint up agency working with all those various agencies, then this may well have been prevented.
Oh, I mean, 100% could have been prevented. But this is it. Whenever there is, and Prime Minister said, you know, it's not been classed as a terror attack, even though, of course, one of the charges he's actually pleaded guilty to is in itself a terror offence. The fact that he didn't have a clear theology or ideology, you know, is frankly, I think for most of us, neither here nor there. The fact that he'd been expelled from school, there'd been violence at school, attacking with a hockey stick, arriving at school with a knife, having to be, you know, literally grabbed by teachers at one point. The fact that social workers wouldn't go to his home without police present, referred to prevent on 3 occasions. Father desperately, you know, pleading with a cab driver a week earlier to not take his son to his old high school on the final day at school, where apparently he wanted to perpetrate a massacre. Obsession with genocide, obsession with violence, downloading an Al-Qaeda terror man. I mean, you know, the list goes on and on and on. And it's so similar in lots of ways to every other attack where we've seen mass killings, whether it's a terrorist or a madman or a combination of the two. They are known to the authorities. People are fearful of them. There are concerns, but nothing appears to be done. What could have been done to mean that he wasn't on the streets able to do this?
Certainly, I don't know about the on the streets being able to do this, but I think the prevent calls, the 3 calls that were made over a period of, I think, 17 or 18 months, where then they made the decision that it didn't meet the threshold for intervention. And I think if they'd have met the threshold for intervention, that could have gone a long way.
What is the threshold for intervention? I mean, he talked about, you know, wanting to kill people.
Yeah, I think I'm not a counter-terrorism expert, but what I would say is that they would have looked at what he'd been looking at online in terms of you know, whether he was looking at other Al-Qaeda or anything like that, or other sites that would indicate that he has some form of terrorist mind. And I think that it may be that Prevent looked at this, and where they get many calls where young people are absolutely obsessed online because they get access online to serious violence or, you know, stuff that is just absolutely beyond the recognition of what any child would be able to have access to. But they may have put it into that kind of category, I don't know. But I think this inquiry will certainly let those details become known at some point.
I mean, that's the thing. A lot of people wonder why we need to have an inquiry in this. You know, lots of things we don't get an inquiry into, like the grooming gangs, and, you know, different reasons given at different times.
We did get an inquiry into the grooming gangs, Julia. We had a 7-year inquiry.
It wasn't into grooming gangs. They spent 10 days doing grooming gangs. It
still touched on grooming gangs. And I think, in fairness now, 7,000 of those victims were spoken to. The ICSA report identified 20 recommendations, and the former previous government did nothing about that.
Completely agree. Utter failings. I'm casting aspersions on everyone involved and their failings, but everyone's got to stop this idea that there was not an investigation to grooming gangs. It was touched on very briefly in 10 days. Whistleblowers didn't give evidence. Many victims didn't give evidence. It's a mischaracterisation of the truth, and everyone, if you have to read the report to know and look at the actual hearings on the day. But in terms of this crime, 3 little girls are dead. 8 other little girls have had their lives absolutely turned around. A man and a woman as well who tried to, shield the children. Other children absolutely terrified. I mean, the awful truth is 3 little girls died that day. It could have been 20. It could have been far more. We could have been in a much worse scenario. This is so awful. But there are other people like Axel Rudiger-Barnett who are sitting there, bit of a loner, unhappy, maybe got bullied at school, as we're told that might be the issue. Something's going on at home. This could be happening right now in another teenager's bedroom. How do we stop the next one and the next one and the next one?
That's a really good point, actually, that you've raised here. Let's not also forget that David Amos was stabbed 20 times by Ali Harbi, who was also a lone wolf acting alone. These are really difficult individuals to be able to detect.
But again, known to the authorities.
Yeah, if they're known to the authorities, you've got to be able to look into them. And I think that the prevent strategy, systems and processes need a deep dive into that, because there needs to be some changes, some serious reform around that. But very, very difficult to detect. I know that Sir Keir Starmer said this morning that this is a new kind of territory that we're going into. But I don't actually think it's that new, because when we had COVID, there was a lot of talk, and I remember just coming out of policing at that point, about lone wolves acting in their rooms alone, people being radicalised. We had two young men last week convicted for neo-Nazi terrorist activity. So this isn't anything really new. There are far too many of these young people that are, not young people, but anybody that is sat in a room alone, isolated, get onto the internet, and then suddenly find themselves absolutely obsessed with this type of activity. It's going to be very, very difficult to detect. And I'm not sure if how they're going to change the threshold.
We're going to need to get better at it, and I suggest we lower the threshold. I mean, certainly kids are being referred to prevent and having action taken for saying something a bit nasty in the playground, for goodness sake, or ignorant in the playground. I think we should be worrying a little bit more about the ones who are obsessed with genocide and stabbings. Shabnam Chowdhury, former Detective Superintendent at Scotland Yard, thank you so much for joining us. Going to take a quick break. Up next, we're going to be talking about the COVID inquiry. What did Professor Chris Whitty really think about mandatory vaccines for health workers? And why on earth does Anthony Fauci, who oversaw COVID policy in the United States throughout the pandemic, why on earth would he need to have a full pardon in advance for any crimes he may have been committing? Apparently none, but why? We'll talk to Carl Hennigan about that. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
This is a fundamental systems failure of epic proportions. I think what really concerned me, Mike, was the lack of warmth and affection on his trip to Southport.
Yeah.
It was very robotic. A lack of empathy is very robotic and mechanical for me. And I think that you're talking about a very quiet, traditional seaside town in on Merseyside. And they're suffering this horrific atrocity. And the Prime Minister went up there, and I think for me, he displayed a real lack of leadership.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. Tom Slater still with me, is editor at Spiked Online. Tom Slater, I mean, does it not still surprise you, talking about something completely different from Southport and Donald Trump, just for a change, that the man who was Chief Medical Officer during the entire COVID pandemic, Professor Chris Whitty, is now still the Chief Medical Officer of this country, but now has been knighted, despite everything we now know and what has come out, not just from the COVID inquiry, but also, let's face it, from Matt Hancock's WhatsApps.
I mean, it's incredible. It's not even failing upwards so much as it is failing catastrophically and then being allowed to remain in post, garlanded with knighthoods and so on. And you think that just from the perspective of this is your one job. I mean, the public health establishment, they seem to have convinced themselves that people's waistlines and their habits and what they get up to in their private time is actually their area of expertise and what they should be focusing on. Pandemics, actual public health is where these individuals should be tested. And he failed that test miserably. The fact that he continues to pontificate on these issues, the fact that there's never been any real sort of accountability for the mistakes that he clearly made, is horrendous, but I guess that was always going to be the way that worked.
Yeah, indeed, and that's where we are right now. Well, let's talk about this with Carl Hennigan. He's Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford. We spoke to him, as you know, many times throughout the COVID pandemic, and he joins us right now. Good morning to you, Carl. Afternoon, sorry.
Good morning, Julie.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Chris Whitty was at the COVID inquiry yesterday. He's done a number of different appearances, but he told the public inquiry that he was sceptical about making COVID vaccines mandatory for healthcare workers. And he said the decision to implement that mandate was 100%, he said, a political one. It would have been useful to know that at the time, wouldn't it, when we saw thousands of certainly care workers being sacked from their jobs, even though many of them had already had COVID, had worked throughout COVID with very vulnerable patients, and sacked. But apparently there wasn't actually any particular medical reason for this mandate. What do you make of that?
I'm really struggling to understand what the purpose is of a chief medical officer. It's supposed to be somebody who's responsible for the medical care of the whole of the UK, or in this case, England, maybe. Now, in doing so, he has to be honest, but coming after the event, somebody now really should be saying, you didn't do your job. And if you look at it, what they did is say every healthcare worker had to have a vaccine. That was going to come into enforce in April 2022, and a month before, they removed it. Now, in doing so, but by November of 21, all the care home workers had to have vaccines and about 40,000 people left their jobs. So actually created more harm than good. But what's really an important issue here is they understood that the vaccine manufacturers were telling them that the payouts could be as high as 300 billion for the harms caused this vaccine. Yeah. And that in doing so, you're still going to go ahead with a mandate. At some point, we have to make sure people are accountable. This COVID inquiry is just like a nice little talking shop. Yeah. There's no prosecution here who comes along and says, I'm sorry, you are accountable for this error. Yeah. Shouldn't you be leaving your job?
Yeah, indeed. And extraordinarily, of course, we know that it was the politicians making the decisions. We know that from the WhatsApps. A lot of it was just done on a whim, by the Health Secretary or by the Prime Minister, or not to be one-upped by Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. But again and again, we've seen Professor Whitty and other medical experts, and probably these are highly qualified experts, kind of just sort of shrugged and went, well, yeah, we didn't really have any evidence for kids wearing masks, fairy towels all day at school, or we didn't really have any evidence for a mandate, or for kids getting the COVID vaccine, even though, of course, it was JCVI argued that they didn't need it, and they absolutely didn't. But they went along with it. And yet, when they stood alongside the Prime Minister or the Health Secretary when they made an announcement, they tacitly supported it. The politicians used them for cover, but they never so we assumed, well, you're thinking it's a good policy, you agree with it. But their job, they were paid by us as taxpayers, they were paid by us to actually give medical advice, and I think, frankly, they should have let us know when the decision was political, not medical.
So this is the important aspect. It's this problem of being at the altar of certainty. In medicine, there are loads of uncertainties. Yeah. It's always about the benefits to the harms. And my job as a doctor is importantly to convey that. Now, I can accept the mathematicians in the world have no idea what I'm on about here, and the modelers. But actually, the chief medical officer job is to stand up and say, honestly, in this situation, there are potential harms that might affect us, and we shouldn't be having a vaccine mandate. Yeah. clear, and that's my position of chief medical officer, and if the government fires me, fair enough. But if he did that, he would have huge respect amongst the public.
Yes.
We may be talking about a different system that allows us to be honest with the citizens.
And also, again, weighing up the vaccine. Again, the vaccine was only developed, was supposed to be for over 70s, the people who were largely the people who were dying. And everybody should have been given, full evidence. Again, one of the main reasons I got the vaccine, I had elderly parents, one in particular was unwell, and we were told it would help prevent transmission. It seemed to me to be the responsible thing to do, even though I felt no risk whatsoever from COVID at the time. I'd already had it, didn't you? But I thought that might help. And again, I was basically sold the vaccine on a lie. They had no evidence for that statement at all. But this man is not only still in situ, he's been knighted and seems to be sort of shrugging and totally unbothered by the fact that he completely let the nation down. And, children being jabbed unnecessarily, again, even more unforgivable. Can I ask you also there about what went on in America? Because we were we're often downstream what America was doing. Anthony Fauci was the man who was basically, Dr. Anthony Fauci, in charge of sort of advising the president's in terms of COVID policy there. He's the former head of the National Institute of Allergy Infectious Diseases. But he basically, he was the man who was saying, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do. Huge amount of evidence now that he was in charge and helped to fund research that went on at the Wuhan lab in China that was looking into basically COVID, changing COVID viruses and possibly making them more deadly. We know that advice went out. I mean, people were banned from social media, accused of being conspiracy theorists when people said they thought this virus had come from a lab rather than from a meat market and by a wet market by accident. This man has now been given a full pardon for any possible future criminal charges brought against him for this period by Joe Biden, the outgoing US president. Why on earth would he need such a thing?
Well, I think the biggest mistake in the issue is that actually he went to a Senate hearing committee and he said the NIH has not and does not fund gain-of-function research. And then what happened is it came out that actually they totaled of $8 million worth of research, of which 600,000, went to the Wuhan Institute. So basically, the biggest criminal offence I think he did, which in the US, if you lie to Congress, that is a serious offence. So that's why he's been pardoned, to allow him to get away with that. But it's also backfired, I think, because it's shown you the problem of people like Fauci, who said the vaccine was a dead end for the virus. Complete misinformation and actually ridiculous. But he was pushing it at the time with the mandates. Yeah. Now, the other thing, though, we could learn from America, which I think is interesting, if you look what happens in America is they appoint their own people, like their chief medical officers, with the incoming government. And they people are political and live and die by that government. I do think we would get a better accountable system than just letting our advisors and our civil servants lie there and do what they want with no accountability.
Being accountable. I just think they should be accountable to us rather than to the prime ministers they advise. I think that should be the key thing, shouldn't it? Carl Hennigan, we'll have to leave it there. Times Against Us, Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford. No, Tom Slater. I mean, it is just absolutely shocking what's happened with Fauci, isn't it? I mean, he has absolutely got away with this.
I know, and the fact that Joe Biden was willing to hand him this pardon, I mean, it's only going to further fuel people's scepticism about the way in which the government dealt with this and them covering each other's backs.
And this isn't a conspiracy theory. There is so much evidence.